If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What's the most bizarre and scary thing you've encountered that, no matter how many times you tell it, nobody ever believes you?
A couple of years ago, I was walking along my back deck to throw a bag in the trash bin. It was around 2 in the morning, and it was dark out. I felt something standing beside me, so I stopped and turned, and what I saw was what people call a shadow person, like the Hat Man but no hat. It was about 7 to 8 feet tall, darker than the night sky, and had 2 little white dots for eyes. It was in a solid form, as I couldn't see through it. I freaked out, dropped the bag, and just started blurting out, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." It immediately vanished, and 4 feet behind where it had been, standing on the top of my neighbor's fence, was a black cat glaring at me. It hissed before jumping down and running away. Okay, the cat being there can be easily dismissed as just a cat that happened to be there. I'm not saying it shapeshifted or anything like that. But I know what I saw as far as the dark figure. It scared the shit out of me and probably the cat, and I haven't found any logical theories as to what else it could have been. Anyway, that's one of my bizarre encounters. Anyone else experience this or something similar? I think I saw the Easter Bunny as a child. It might sound absurd, but bear with me, I remember this memory so vividly that I haven't forgotten it in 21 years. I was in my primary school in Glasgow, Scotland. I've since moved away, but anyway, the way our classroom was, it was set under the ground, but there were windows halfway/near the top of the walls you could see outside. Anyway, we were in an arts and crafts class, I believe, and I saw this bunny/rabbit thing with some cape or something like that. It had pink on it, and it just hopped so weirdly. It looked down in the class and then just hopped away. I just shouted to my teacher, "I saw the Easter Bunny," but she dismissed it, saying, "Don't be silly, the Easter Bunny isn't real," etc. But I was and still am so convinced of what I saw. Now I don't believe in the Easter Bunny per se, but could it be some phenomenon where the other manifests itself in all sorts of bizarre ways, and I find it's always to children this happens? This is my first time recounting it in 22 years, and I just wanted to get others' thoughts on this. When I was about 16 or 17 years old, I was playing video games in the living room by myself. It was late at night, not sure what time exactly. While I'm playing, my cat walks up to the glass patio door to be let outside. I get up and open the door for him, and he hops outside. A few minutes later, he was sitting outside the door to be let back in, so I opened the door for him, and he hopped back inside. I continued to play video games. About 5 minutes later, he's back outside the glass door, meowing to be let inside. I could not believe what I was seeing. We lived in an apartment on the 2nd floor, and there was no way for him to be back outside on the patio. I just gazed at him for a few seconds, got up, and opened the door for him. He hopped back inside in the same exact way as he did the first time. Still to this day, I have absolutely no idea how that happened. Also, in this same apartment, I abruptly woke up at 3 a.m. for no reason at all. Just woke up, was immediately lucid like I wasn't even sleeping, and sat straight up in bed. At the exact moment I woke up, my guitar across the room fell forward onto the floor, as if it were being lowered slowly. It was leaning against a chair and literally fell forward. It didn't slip or fall over like things normally would. I also have no idea how this happened or why I woke up out of nowhere to see it happen. I saw and talked to what I believe to be a ghost in my friend's basement. My friend, we'll call him David, has lived in this house for about 5 years. My other friend, we'll call him Brent, used to live there with him and a few others. David lives in this house alone now, but we are all friends and visit a few times a week. Brent used to tell me all the time how haunted the place was, but out of the 4 years I've known him, I had never seen anything. I kind of wrote it all off. One night, about a year ago, Brent and I were house sitting for David while he was out of town. Feeding the cats, watering the plants, and just hanging out because we had nothing better to do. I went downstairs to pee because Brent was in the bathroom upstairs. As I walked back up, I felt something touch my shoulder, and I fell down. It wasn't a grab, but it was kind of like a shove. I convinced Brent to go downstairs with me and see what the duck that was, or if it was just a coincidence. We left the lights off. I thought it'd be more fun and could potentially see something, so I just sat there in the dark on opposite ends of the room. The basement had no windows, it was one big open room with a bathroom and a single bedroom that went off it. Brent sat by the staircase, and I sat all the way opposite. We hadn't sat there for more than 5 minutes in silence when I saw an orange light manifest on my side of the room and fly all the way into the bedroom and turn the corner. It was about 7 feet in the air. I, obviously terrified, launched myself off the ground and, on my hands and feet, barreled toward Brent. "Did you see that?" I screamed. and all he said in an extremely calm voice was, "The orange light? Yay." We made our own makeshift Ouija board and sat in that room. In no time at all, we were getting responses. I've known Brent for 4 years, and it's easy to say he's my best friend. He had no reason to duck with me and is extremely trustworthy. He's a ride or die kinda guy. We got an alleged spirit come through named Ham. We asked if those were initials and just got no. Then the cat launched out of the room. I asked, "Can the cat see you?" And again got no. All of the responses were misspelled, but it was easy to figure out what they were supposed to be. I'm going to share a list of questions we asked with responses. 1. How many of you are here? Answer, 15. 2. Do you know my name? Answer, my name came through. 3. Do you know my dog's name? Yes, my dog's name has come through. 4. Do you follow me home? Answer, no. 5. Ham, what do you want from us? Answer, run, demon. You bet I flew out of that basement as fast as I possibly could. One last spooky thing happened on the way out. I had my radio on as I was backing out of the driveway, and the signal cut out multiple times until I hit the street. I've never seen Brent so visibly shaken, especially from the house he lived in for years. He stayed at my house that night. I was doing internet and satellite installs in west central Minnesota in like 2011 or 2012. I was helping a client on a very incredibly rural piece of land. He seemed like nice enough of a guy. Offered to help, had spare tools, and seemed pretty sharp. We get to talking, and this subject comes up. I share a story of mine, and he says he has one, but I'm not going to believe him. I laugh and say I've seen enough weird shit in my life, I doubt I could be weirded out, and what he has to say is probably true anyway. After some internal deliberation, he decided he's willing to share. He says he wants to preface this with the fact he's never tried methamphetamine and has no known mental health issues, so I knew it was going to be good. Allegedly, he was out working on the farm one day when he saw this strange glowing orb. He says if you're raised on a farm in the Midwest, you're familiar with ball lightning from a very young age, and this was not that. The guy is very visibly affected by recounting his story of this orb shooting across the sky, landing down on the ground a few feet away from him, then making a beeline for his barn. He thought the orb was going to light everything on fire, but it passed slowly and noiselessly through the door until it disappeared completely. He thinks he's lost his mind because, well, he knows how it sounds. After a short period of time, it reappears out of the barn, shoots back up into the sky, where it hovers for a moment, then disappears. I had only ever once heard someone's voice catch because they were so terrified/affected by something, and that was with someone who had experienced a very grievous trauma. This was my second time. I have every reason to believe everything he told me was true, and I firmly believe he saw what he did. What could it have been? I don't really know, but it was obviously there. I saw his barn, and the doors were at least 12 or 14 feet tall, so this sphere must have been massive. There was no electrical or fire damage to anything inside. I regret not asking him if anything was missing. It's been years, I can't explain it with science. I don't know where to turn. Me and my dad were driving home from something. Though it's been so long I forgot, all I remember was the strange occurrence. On our way home, the headlights shone on something, a huge dog-like figure, maybe coyote or wolf-sized. This creature was jet black, I don't think I could even discern a fur texture, it was just a jet black dog-like creature that's eyes were wide in the reflection of the light. And we hit it, and we went over it hard. Me and my dad were freaked out, so we got out to see if it was alive and if there was any damage to the car, but there was nothing, no marks, no body, no blood, and no trace. Me and my father both agreed we saw the creature, but we were dumbfounded as to what it was and what just happened. We got into the car and drove away, trying our best to forget the incident. I can't stop thinking about what we encountered that day. I've looked up everything I could in the form of species in the area of suburban Toronto, Canada, but I don't know, this is the only place left to turn. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning, me and 3 others were skateboarding in an area surrounded by dense woods. At some point we huddled together to take a break, and while we were talking, I faintly heard what sounded like a drumbeat pattern. It was distant and quiet. I didn't consciously focus on it for a minute or two, when suddenly I heard another sound on top of the drum beats. It was a scream. Then I could hear a voice that was chanting, it was like a song that had a specific pattern. A few seconds of the voice chanting, then a scream followed by a flurry of drums and more chanting. Over and over, on repeat, but so far away and so faintly that I barely noticed it was there. I know it sounds cliché, but it reminded me of a native ritual dance. I paused to listen more intently, then motioned for the others to do the same. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just hearing things. Everyone could hear it though, and when we all fell silent, the unmistakable rhythmic chanting and drums got louder. We laughed a little, not sure what to make of it. We thought it was someone with a Bluetooth speaker sitting in the woods trying to scare us. So we did the thing that gets all the characters in the movies in trouble and went looking for it. We went into the forest, and the chanting got louder. It was coming from a water reservoir in the back of the park, and at this point we were guessing it was someone on a boat. The closer we got to the water, the louder and clearer we could hear the chanting. However, as soon as we got to the water's edge, the drums and chanting disappeared. It was dead quiet, and nobody was on the water. The moon was bright, and we could easily see the entire reservoir. Nothing. The water was still. It was the most puzzling thing. Was it someone playing a joke? Was it actually a group of people doing some kind of late-night band practice? Maybe a ritual from a local coven? Because of the location of this place and how the forest and surrounding water body were situated, it is unlikely anyone would actually be back there without us having heard or seen anyone walking in. It's the most paranormal thing that's happened to me. There seems to be something weird in those woods. I was about 14 to 15, just watching TV, when I heard my mother call for me to come quick. There was an urgency in her voice, so I jumped up right away and began running towards the stairs. As I rounded the corner to swing down the stairs, I stopped dead at the top of the step. I could see my mother in the kitchen on the same floor as me. She was busy doing her thing and didn't seem to be in any distress. I had an instant feeling of dread come over me, and suddenly I knew not to go downstairs. I asked my mom if she had called for me. She had not. It was my mom's voice that I heard, clear and strong. When I explained what happened to me, my mom reacted instantly, "I knew it. I'm telling your father it has to go." Apparently my father had recently inherited an object my mother believed was possessed. She didn't share her experiences with me but only mentioned she had experienced them too. She also refused to tell me what the object was. She believed talking about the demons only gave them energy, so she didn't give me any details. To this day, I wonder what was waiting for me downstairs. This happened about 2 years ago. My eldest sister was staying with me and sleeping in the room across the hall. The room my sister was staying in wasn't huge by any means. When you walked in, the light switch was by the door, and it was about 3 steps to the queen-size bed, which took up most of the room. It was about 4 to 5 feet from the end of the bed to the wall, but there was a vanity and some shelving, so there wasn't a lot of floor space. We go to bed, and my sister looks very disturbed and shaken the next day. She said she woke up in the middle of the night and got up to go to the bathroom. She stood up and reached out for the wall and light switch, and there was nothing there. She kept walking and reaching out, but it was dark and there was just nothing. She found the bed again and walked from the end, but the same thing. She said she had walked 20 or 30 steps in each direction, and here was just nothing. I have slept in that room many times, and there is a window that lets in street light, but there was none of that from her description. She had been in pitch darkness. She sat on the bed for a bit since it seemed to be the only thing. She freaked out in the dark, and when she tried again, she found the wall and light switch right away. She slept with the lights on for the rest of the night. I hadn't heard of this happening before. Has anyone had a similar experience? Not mine, but my step-grandfather's story. My stepfather had a tough life. He grew up with his many siblings being passed around through homes and orphanages. He would usually tell me a lot of funny stories because I was still young before he passed. But one story was different, and I didn't remember it until just now. I have no proof other than my word. One night, when he was 10 or so, he'd gone to bed at one of the orphanages he once stayed at. It was really late at night, and he was having a hard time sleeping. But when he did fall asleep, he had weird dreams where he made it sound like he was having an out-of-body experience. He was seeing himself sleeping in his bed that night, like he was in the body of another person entirely. He described it like he was standing over himself, so I have to assume he was much taller. Then it all ends because he wakes up and opens his eyes. He said standing over him, surrounding his bed, only the back end was touching the wall, were 5 or so really tall, dark people. Dark, as in shadowy. He was unable to make out their faces. He said he didn't feel scared and that he closed his eyes again. Then he said he fell asleep again and woke up in the morning. That was how he ended the story. No payoff. He never told the story to me again, and he's been dead for a long time, so there's no way to find out anything else. Based on vague memories of how he ended up telling me the story, I believe he was trying to say they were aliens. As a kid, I remember saying that's awful at the end, because I think at the time I thought he was implying they had hurt him in a bad way. But looking back, I don't think he meant it as a scary story. He was very quiet after. My step-grandfather was great. He was a father figure for me, and I think I just wanted to share his story to honor him. I miss him a lot, and I do want to take his word for it here. I don't remember him as a liar, especially when communicating with me. It was late afternoon, and I was probably around 10 at the time. I was on my way home from school football when I realized an odd man was walking along my street. At first I stopped walking and examined the man for a moment. There was something about him that didn't sit right with me. The way he moved, the way he looked, the way he was looking at things in such definitive detail, I couldn't really put my finger on it. All I knew was that his presence made me feel very uncomfortable. I went and sat behind a car, so he couldn't see me, and I waited for a few moments. As he walked onto someone's driveway, out of view, I ran back to my house, which was only a few doors down. It didn't take me too long to reach my driveway, however, at the moment I stepped onto my driveway, I felt like I was being watched. I didn't want to look back. I rushed into my house to tell my mom and my grandparents what I had seen. Of course they just brushed it off and made an excuse for it not to be some kind of alien-like man. I couldn't be bothered to stand around and try and convince them, so I went up to my room and stared. I stared out of my window for a while, and then there they were. My window looks out onto my driveway, so I could see him clearly. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 5 inches or so, and extremely skinny. His neck was abnormally long, and his shoulders were narrow. He wore a white sports jersey and a pair of baggy jeans. The top of his head was large and veiny. Overall, he was a really weird-looking person. I bolted downstairs, with the most intense adrenaline rush I've ever had to tell my family. Out of breath, I stuttered out my words, and they walked on into the living room to look around themselves. My mom's face turned pale as she stared into the eyes of the person, who was now standing right up against the living room window, so close in fact that you could see the condensation from his breath on the glass. He slowly pulled up a notebook from his pocket and started writing. As this happened, everything was quiet, and everybody was frozen. It was the eeriest atmosphere I've ever experienced. A few seconds passed, and he finished taking his notes, and he strolled back down the driveway. Still pale, my mom turned to me with an expression of terror and complexion. The only thing we knew to do from here was to contact the police, which we did. However, they looked for this man all over the neighborhood and he couldn't be found. Overall, this experience has probably been one of the most bizarre and terrifying I have ever had. I'm hoping someone could help me figure out what has actually happened here and who or what this person was. Something unexplainable happened to me in the woods years ago, and it has been on my mind ever since. So, I live in the southwest of the UK. Years ago, when I was around 17, this would be about 15 years ago, I got kicked out by my mom, who I was living with, because we had an argument. I wandered the streets that night, trying to stay awake. I asked friends if I could stay with them, but that wasn't an option unfortunately. At the time, I lived in a relatively new suburban area, so I decided to walk into the nearby woods that overlooked some farmland, hoping to watch the stars and find a place to sleep. This was around 2 a.m. There was a large wooded area near some flats, and I crawled through a thicket, which led to an open space. As I walked through, it was pitch black, and I thought this would be a nice, safe area to try and sleep. As I lay down, suddenly, I heard footsteps. They sounded heavy and loud, and it sounded like they were circling me. I froze and asked if anyone was there. The footsteps got faster and faster, pacing around me. Then, I heard a deep growl. It sounded big. I panicked and ran away, through the thicket and onto the street. At the time I had about £100 in my bank account, so I wandered to a nearby hotel to see if I could get a room, but they would not let me in. I was cold, desperate, and scared, so I walked to a nearby 24-hour shop, bought some snacks and a torch, and made my way back to the thicket. This time I was armed with a light. When I returned to the woods, I heard the footsteps again. I quickly turned on the torch, shining it all around, looking for where the footsteps were coming from, but I couldn't see anything. Then, I heard the growl again. It was deep and reverberating. It sounded like it was right next to me. I could hear it but not see it, but it sounded big. But no matter how much I shone the torch, I could not see what was making the noise. I ran away to a nearby bus stop and spent the night there, awake but scared. And I spent my night there. The next day I met up with a friend, and I told her what happened and I wanted to investigate, and me and her went to go through the thicket into this open space. She was scared after the story I told her, but it was daylight, but I went in again, and she stayed outside. But I heard the growl again. Really loud. And it's really close. But it was daylight. I could hear it but not see it. I know this sounds made up. But please, believe me, it scares the shit out of me, and no one believes what I witnessed. If anyone has any similar stories, please let me know. Last night, I had an experience I can't fully explain, and for someone like me, who doesn't believe in paranormal things, that's saying something. I'm a rational person, and for me, everything has a logical explanation. Around 2:30 a.m., in the dead of night, I woke up with a strange, eerie feeling that someone was watching me. As I blinked myself awake, I saw a shadowy figure sitting at the edge of my bed. The room was pitch black, but I could clearly make out this dark silhouette. What made it even weirder was that my cat, who never sleeps in the bedroom, let alone on the bed, was lying down by my feet. That alone felt off. The figure was sitting at the edge of the bed, near the cat, and what freaked me out was that it looked like it was petting my cat. My cat wasn't acting freaked out either, it was just staring at this shadow. At first, I thought maybe it was my boyfriend, who had woken up and was petting the cat. But when I looked beside me, he was fast asleep. My next thought was that maybe it was an intruder, but the more I stared at the figure, the more unsettling it became. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the haze, assuming I was dreaming or half asleep. But the figure didn't vanish. I grabbed my glasses, hoping it would bring some clarity, but it was still there. It almost looked like it was pulsing. I just kept trying to focus my vision hard, hoping it would disappear, and it's just in my head. While I'm still in disbelief, I pulled away from this figure, sitting down on the bed, rubbing my eyes repeatedly. The being pulled the hood of what looked like a jacket over its head. Then it stood up, slowly, and it started growing taller, looming by the door. I was frozen, just staring at it, my mind racing to find some rational explanation. But this thing was towering over me, becoming something more than just a shadow. That's when I fully woke up, wide awake, and panicked. I shook my boyfriend, scared, shouting, "There's something here. Something is watching us." He woke up in a daze and said there was nothing there. I asked him if he really didn't see it, and he just kept saying, "There's nothing there, what are you seeing?" Meanwhile, my cat, who never does this, squeezed in between us, trying to get as close as possible, almost like it was frightened too. Seeking our cuddles and attention, or maybe trying to calm me down? The shadowy figure didn't leave. It just stood there, taunting me, almost like it was dancing or messing with me. I was still frozen, thinking, am I losing it? What was happening didn't feel possible. My boyfriend told me to turn on the light. I did, and the second the light filled the room, the figure vanished. But my cat was still staring, its eyes locked onto the same spot where the figure had been, and following it around in the room, like he was tracking something invisible. I don't know what to think of it. I've never believed in ghosts, shadow people, or anything like that. I've always dismissed those kinds of stories. But this, I can't shake it. It felt too real. It was real. I feel as though I witnessed something I shouldn't have. I don't know what it was. I've never believed in this stuff, and now I feel completely insane. Any idea what it could have been? My girlfriend at the time, 2 other friends, and I went out late at night near Chesapeake, Virginia. I went off-roading, which is my favorite activity, but I was bamboozled when my girlfriend pulled out an Ouija board. I know they're BS, but I have past traumas with demons and the like. I'm a schizophrenic, so I wasn't happy when my girlfriend pulled it out behind my back because she knew how much I hated stuff like that. During my rant, the driver, I legit forgot his name, well, say Matt, said he knew the super secret demon code words to truly activate the Ouija board and open a portal. I called him a delusional LARPing ducknut, but just as we pulled under the bridge, the truck shut off completely. It's the middle of the night, the silence is overwhelming, and the truck refuses to start. No clicks, no beeps, absolutely nothing. That doesn't just happen. I told Matt to stop ducking around, but we were all getting scared. The windows were starting to fog up, and suddenly slap. There was a handprint in the window fog right next to my girlfriend's face. Then slap. Another one. And another. Then it became a thunderous sound of slapping as new handprints were forming all around us on all windows. All of us were screaming like crazy, myself included. I'll admit, when, after a few moments of terror, the truck sparks back to life and Matt duckin' spins dirt out of there. I was furious, thinking it was all some elaborate prank on the schizo kid. But the way they all talked about it, still in shock, I don't think it was a prank. We tried telling other friends what happened at the smoke pit the next day, but no one believed us. So my friends either really pulled an elaborate scare prank with really convincing acting, or this was some paranormal duckery. Either way, duck that bridge. Saw a weird thing outside my window. I saw part of something that was very bizarre outside my window at around 1 a.m. It was similar to a giant, thick stem in shape, but it had a weird, fuzzy quality to it, like when moonlight hits things in really dark places. Coming off of it were some sort of thin strands that looked like when you peel apart string cheese and there's those thin cheese wisps. Weird comparison, ick. The strands moved alike to slow-mo wet fabric in the wind, clinging to each other and flapping somewhat violently. The main stem part of the thing also swayed, though it was very slow and subtle, like when a younger tree is blown by wind or shifted by someone climbing in the branches. I couldn't see where it ended, as my garden is terraced, and it was on the 3rd level, mostly blocked by the awning above my window. Still, something tells me it was very tall. I only noticed it was there because I had gotten up to grab a snack and sat at the foot of my bed eating for a second before I got the strong feeling I was being watched. Being an idiot, I ignored my fear and looked out my window, seeing that thing. After that, I just laid down and turned my back to the window. I wasn't really sure what else I could do, and something told me not to check outside again. This was several months ago, and honestly, I feel sort of crazy every time I think about it because it's so strange. I had convinced myself it was just a tree so I could sleep that night, but when I checked in the morning, there was no tree to be found anywhere near where I saw it. I also very commonly get the feeling I'm being watched from that window at night. Now, I don't want to reveal too much about my location, but I feel safe saying my area, and entire state, really, is saturated in stories of spirits from a lot of different cultures. Behind my garden is also a tropical, mountainous forest. Any clue what I saw? Strange entity in my house. Okay, so I want to preface by saying that I don't meditate. I have tried a few times but have never been able to get into the habit of it. I'd like to try again, but I haven't for a few years. I have suffered from sleep paralysis for most of my life, although that stopped when I hit around 31. I've been able to achieve lucid dream states. I've always thought that I was able to sense certain things. But other than that, I don't really spend time thinking about or researching anything about this sort of thing. I have had 2 other incidences in this house, other than the frequent sleep paralysis that I used to experience, but both happened in the middle of the night, and I have attributed them to sleep hallucinations/night terrors. The other night I was home alone. It was only about 6:30, but due to the time of year, it was completely dark. I had just gotten out of the shower. I was a little uneasy in the shower because I don't like showering at night when I'm home alone. I just have an anxiety that someone could break in. Due to my partner's work schedule, I am home alone most nights, and I sometimes get uneasy. Anyways, so I got out of the shower and decided I wanted to make some cookies. I had been stuck home sick for a few days and was starting to feel better, and I wanted something sweet. I was standing at my kitchen island about to measure out the butter. My living area is open plan, so from my island I can see the entire living room, and directly across from my spot on the island, my cat was curled up in his bed at the far living room wall. I was just looking down at the butter about to cut into it when all of a sudden I heard and felt this weird sound. It was like a mix between a reverberation and the buzzing of an insect's wings, but bigger than an insect. And I could feel it. It's really hard to explain, but the sound filled the room in a really weird way that I felt down to my bones. I looked up in alarm, and in the passway between the island and the living room section, I saw this black shadow zoom past really fast towards the dining room and then sort of saw/felt it zoom around behind me. It wasn't large or shaped like a human. It was around chest height and just sort of a formless black blur. I honestly would have convinced myself that I had imagined this, but my cat, who was right in my line of sight, sat up and tracked the blur thing as well. I saw his pupils get big the way cats do when they see something moving swiftly. As this was happening, the buzzing sound/feeling got more intense, and I had a moment where I just thought, oh, SHT, this is happening, what, I don't know, but I remember thinking that clearly. And then, as soon as it happened, it was just gone. Like I felt fully alone again, other than my cat. Now I was really spooked out and alarmed, but I never felt true dread or terror. And when it was over, I really felt like whatever it was gone from the room. Afterwards, my cat was looking towards the back area of the house for a bit. And then he seemed slightly uneasy but not actively alarmed. After about 10 minutes, he went back to sleep, albeit not in the fully liquid, relaxed state that he had been in before. I'm hoping someone here might have a possible explanation for what happened. To me, it felt like there was an entity of some kind that was here. If something had gone into me, I'd like to think I would know. I've since gotten myself quite spooked out about it, and I'm nervous for Monday, when I'll be home alone again. I know negative feelings are not something I should engage with, but it is easier said than done. I saw a white slime climbing a tree tonight. So basically I was with a group of friends walking from one condominium to another. There was a forest between these condominiums, with a fence dividing it from the sidewalk. I was behind the group with one of my friends. We were walking through a slightly dark part of the street, and Sunny both of us saw some white thing in one of the trees. It looked like a slime, and it was moving in a really weird way. It had no legs, no face, and it was a really powerful white, like there's no chance it was a light or something else. I called for the other guys, and as I shouted, it started climbing really fast in a really bizarre way, as if I scared it. I turned on the lights from the phone to see if I could find it, but honestly, I was scared too, and my heart started beating fast, so I just started running away with my friend. It was so good to have him there, because we talked later and both of us saw the same thing and even complimented each other as we talked, so I was sure I was not hallucinating. Of course none of our friends who were in front of us believed in what we said. Some of them got intrigued, but I wouldn't blame them for not believing it, as I wouldn't blame you. It was really strange. It was like that venom slime but white. It's my only encounter with something that I just can't explain. It really looked like it was not from Earth. Barefoot cemetery girl. A couple months ago, me and my buddy were drinking at our friend's house, and we both decided we wanted to leave. Of course, being the responsible guys we are, we agreed to walk to my house, and I would drive him to pick up his car in the morning. It was about 3 a.m. and pretty cold. I only had a sweatshirt on and was shivering a little bit. At one point in the walk, a cemetery was up about a quarter mile to the right. I looked up and saw a little girl with black hair running into the cemetery, and immediately I told my friend to look, but he looked too late and didn't see her as she disappeared into the cemetery. I explained to him what I saw, and obviously he thought I was crazy and just seeing things and wrote it off as I had a little too much to drink. Fast forward about 5 minutes later, and we're walking on the left side of the road with the cemetery to our right immediately next to the road. We're just walking and talking, but I couldn't stop thinking about the little girl I saw running. She had no coat or sweatshirt, and it was cold out. Just as I was about to stop thinking about it, she pops out from a bush right next to the cemetery on the other side of the road. She popped out of the bush and sprinted down the road. I froze with fear, and my friend immediately started laughing. I asked him, "Why the duck are you laughing?" And he said, "Because I can't believe my eyes right now." She kept running, pretty fast, I may add, and just like that she was gone. She didn't disappear like a ghost or anything, she just was too far away to see anymore. Maybe she hid in another bush, I'm not sure. With that closer look we both had, I noticed she had a long sleeve gray t-shirt on and jeans. The strange thing is that she was also barefoot. It was way too cold to be running around with no coat or sweatshirt and barefoot. We called our friends back at the house we were at, and none of them believed us. To this day, I am sure she was real, and it was overall the most creepy experience I've ever had. I saw something, and no one believes me. Back in like 2023, I think, I was at my cousin's house. One of my cousins was at my house, so I slept in her room. I'm pretty sure it was around 2 a.m. minus 3 a.m. I randomly woke up staring at the ceiling. I was wondering what was going on because I was still half asleep, then it just hit me where I was. Anyway, I remembered I put my phone under the pillow and decided I might have as well put it on charge and go back to sleep. But I sat up on the bed and started looking around for my phone, but it was dark. The only thing I could see was the light coming from the door. Long story short, my cousin has a door with a glass window, but they covered the glass with like this paper thing. Anyway, some of the paper on the door was ripped, so only a little bit of the light from the kitchen was shining into the room. But anyway, when I was looking for my phone, I moved a little bit to go and turn the light on, but then froze. I saw this black figure of someone or something staring right at me. I was scared as shit and just kind of sat there for like 4 seconds max, then I snapped out of it and turned back to the pillow and was literally trying to find my phone. I turned back, and the figure started walking downstairs. You know, when those mimes/clowns pretended to walk downstairs, that was what it was doing except at the end of the bed. I finally found my phone, and instead of flashing my torch, I got up and ran out of that room and woke my cousin up. No one believes me to this day, but I know what I saw. Black Triangle Encounter. I encountered a black triangle UFO just a little over 20 years ago. Myself and 3 of my friends were all sitting in my backyard on my picnic table, the top of it, so we were all facing the same way, looking up at the clear night sky one evening in the small town we lived in. We had just left the bar and were chatting about our night and smoking a joint when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we saw something really big, all black, a triangle in shape with no lights whatsoever on it, appear in the night sky. It was a split second that we all saw it move from one end of the sky to the other, and it covered the stars as it did this. It was that massive. Easily the size of a football field, no joke. All of us just looked at each other and exclaimed at the same time, "Holy SHT, did you just see that?" It was insane. I'll never forget it. Then a few weeks after the incident, I had a very vivid dream that I was on a very cold operating table with what I could only sense as beings that were not humans, and they were tickling me each time they touched me. Almost like a faint electrical current. There were more than one touching me in different places all at one time. It was weird because I could feel their physical touches while asleep, like I was actually there. I wasn't able to see anything while this was going on. I'm pretty sure I had something over my face, so I couldn't see them or anything around me. However, I didn't feel threatened or scared by them at all. The dream ended abruptly, and I woke up in my bed. It seemed so real to me, and to this day, I fully believe I was abducted while asleep so they could study me. I have not seen the black triangle in the sky since or had any more alien abduction dreams, thankfully, but it was definitely one of the strangest occurrences for me to date. Has anyone else had a similar encounter? A bizarre incident involved flying orb. Even though this happened Tuesday, I've been trying to figure out a way to put this into words and full detail since this shook me up pretty good. It was 7 p.m., and I was lying down on the couch watching TV. All of a sudden, I get this weird sensation and feel compelled to go outside. It was so out of the ordinary, I never have gotten this feeling before, that I decided to carry my phone with me just in case I saw something. Sure enough, above the tallest tree on my property, was a white orb just hovering above the tree. I take my phone out and start filming. Out of nowhere, as I had just started filming, the orb disappears within a flash. I'm looking around my property to see if it's still there. Within 5 seconds, I see it 100 feet down my property line above the second tallest tree on my property. It just sat there for about 20 seconds, then vaporized into the sky. Here's where it gets bizarre. As I was trying to upload the video, I decided to check it out first to make sure it looked good and stabilize it for you guys beforehand. When I hit play, it got pixelated, and the audio was metallic. That shook me up since it did not do this as I was filming, but only afterwards. I had never had any issues with my phone camera and video up until that point. I decided to try and upload it anyway, despite this, and when I tried, my phone battery crashed and died immediately. My phone battery had never done that before, so that got me nervous. So I charged my phone back up, and when I try to go to the video, it's gone. That is when I got creeped out and didn't know what to do. I'm still paranoid about what happened and want to forget about it. Witnessed a bizarre encounter, wondering if anybody has experienced anything similar. I was visiting my sister in northern CA, we were in Heldsburg. We had eaten lunch, and were walking to a park with our kids. Walking towards us on the other side of the street was a totally normal looking man, probably in his early 50s, dressed in a button-down shirt tucked in with a belt, well kept, big belly. A woman crossing the street from behind us, walking 2 small dogs towards him, passes him while she's still crossing the street. The man takes a weird posture, craning his neck towards the lady, but it seemed like he was looking at the dogs and started making the strangest sound I have ever heard come from a person. It was kind of a rapid metallic machine-like clicking sound. I really don't understand how a human could produce this sound. Both me and my sister stopped talking instantly, and were just kind of freaked out. The woman didn't react at all, nothing, just ignored him. The guy turned back around and kept walking as if nothing happened. Neither of us could come close to making this sound. Neither of us could see any kind of device, and he wasn't holding a phone or anything. I am generally very skeptical about any kind of claims about aliens among us sort of stuff, but this was just ducking weird. Has anyone experienced anything like this? When I was 16, my family and I lived in an old farmhouse, which was essentially a large building split into 2 sections. One side was the living area, and the other was a huge barn filled with all sorts of things. Between these 2 sections was a long, narrow room that could only be accessed through a door that opened to the outside. This is important for the story. This room was my dad's workshop, so it was full of tools, with a large workbench in the middle. There was also a toilet at the back. As I mentioned, the only way in was through that single door leading outside. At the time, we were preparing to move, so we started sorting through our belongings. At one point, we noticed the key that locked this room had gone missing. It was on the same keyring as the barn key, so we searched everywhere because there was no spare. Later, we found the keyring hanging on a coat hook inside the room, just behind the door. The strange part is, the door was locked, and we could see this because it had glass panes. You might think one of the pants was broken and someone was playing a prank, but that wasn't the case. We actually had to break one of the pants to reach the keyring with a stick and unlock the door. What makes this story so unsettling is that the keyring could have been anywhere, but instead, it was right there, hanging in plain view behind the glass, as if someone had locked the door from the inside and deliberately placed the keyring there to mess with us. I want to stress that there was no other way into this room besides that door. The only things that could get in were our cats, possibly through a small hole between the barn and the room. We never really figured out how they were getting in, but nothing big enough for a person. And unless our cats had somehow learned to lock doors, remove keys, and hang them on hooks, I can't think of any other explanation. I should add that I respect people who believe in the supernatural, but I'd prefer this story to be approached by those who think more scientifically, like I do, to help me figure this out. Unfortunately, my family ended up concluding that it was something supernatural, and we never spoke about it again, but that explanation doesn't sit well with me. I wanted to share an experience that happened to me when I was a child. This happened to me in the 80s. I was about 7 at the time. The day started really great. We had a get-together with my parents, twin brothers, my aunt and uncle, and their 3 kids. Much of the day is a blur because I was so young. However, that night is crystal clear. I was sitting on the living room floor with my cousin Kev, and my dad said, "Mouse, time for bed." I remember Daddy picking me up and carrying me up the stairs to bed. He gave me a kiss and went back downstairs. I could not sleep. I was scared of the dark, and I never could sleep until Mom and Dad were in the next room. Sometime later, I heard them come up the stairs. I tried to sleep, but I just couldn't. I had an uneasy feeling. So I went to my mom and asked if I could sleep with them. Mom said sure, and I climbed between them and cuddled up to Mama. I still could not sleep. My parents' room and mine were adjacent to each other, separated by stairs. Because of my fear of the dark, my dad always left the stairway lights on. Mama and I talked for a long time, and finally she said, "Baby, you need to go to sleep," so I crawled on the other side of her and faced the wall towards the door. Still, I couldn't sleep. Mom drifted off, and I lay there staring at the door. Then, I noticed a shadow moving towards the bottom right corner of the doorway. I didn't think much of it. It got bigger, and I thought it was one of the boys or maybe Uncle Ed. I elbowed Mom awake and told her someone was coming up the stairs. Mom asked who was there. No one answered. So we waited to see who was coming. As the shadow got bigger, Mom hollers, "Not funny, Ed, go back downstairs." No response. We were both getting a bit scared. The shadow got bigger, and then I noticed that I couldn't see through the shadow, and now the shadow was creeping into the room. We couldn't see the doorway at all. Mom was freaking out and trying to wake up my dad, but he just wouldn't wake up. We looked at each other, and Mom said, "Go turn on the light." I was scared out of my mind, but I ran to the light and tried to flip the lights on, but it didn't work. I screamed, and Mom shot out of bed, picked me up, and ran down the stairs. Mom was crying, and we went to the living room, and my aunt and uncle were sleeping soundly, and then we checked on my brothers and cousins. All are sleeping soundly. Mom woke up Uncle Ed, and I cuddled up with my aunt. I don't remember the rest of the night, but the next morning my dad came down the stairs and asked, "What happened?" And we told him. We told him that we tried to wake him, but he just wouldn't wake up. He didn't believe us at first. I remember he went to the kitchen to start his coffee and then headed to the bathroom. All of a sudden we heard Dad yell, "What the hell happened to me?" He came out of the bathroom with his shirt off, and we saw 4 long scratches that started at his upper left shoulder and ended on his lower right belly. I don't remember any more of the day after this. We moved 2 weeks later. I have never talked about this before. Only Mom. I've tried researching it, but I never want it to happen again, so I stopped researching it. Even after all this time, I still can't sleep in the dark. Shadow creature? What exactly did we encounter that night? Please be kind here. I hesitate to share this story because I fear no one will believe me. But seeing others share their experiences here made me finally think maybe it's time I tell mine. Side note, my friends' names have been changed for this story as they are still together and very reluctant to ever bring this up. This must have been around 2007. One night, 2 friends and I were out ghost hunting in a very remote little town in western NY. My friend Jane wanted a couple more pictures in the old cemetery, so her boyfriend and I waited in my SUV while she did her thing. It must have been around midnight, and we were parked on a back road, but there were some street lights up ahead. Jane was behind us and off to the right, but we could still see her and her flashlight. John and I happened to be looking up the road when, about 50 to 65 yards ahead, out from under the streetlight on the left-hand side, appeared a black figure in a wide brim. He just appeared. It was blacker than black, more like a void. 100% it was not a person. This being had absolutely no features, but we could make out the hat from the profile. It was a flat top hat with a wide brim around it. On my mother's grave, it took maybe 30 steps before it morphed, the only way I can describe it, into a black cat before it reached the street light on the opposite side of the road and disappeared into a field. Again, you could tell it was the shape of a cat, but it was just a black void. John and I stared at each other for about 2 minutes before we could even speak. When the time came, all he could say was, "You saw that too, didn't you?" We continued to sit there in absolute awe and sheer terror. Jane came back not long after, and I couldn't even move to unlock the doors. I was able to move my hand just enough to hit the unlock button and let her back in. She jokingly said, "You both look like you saw the devil himself." John was a huge guy, very tall, muscular, and intimidating. I looked back over, and he was shaking and in tears. All he could say was "cat." I tried to explain to Jane what had happened, but I struggled to even talk. It was about a 35-minute drive back home, and I can remember Jane saying things like, "This isn't amusing anymore. You guys are scaring me." John insisted we take him to his church, where we both said a prayer to Mother Mary at the outdoor statue. While he continued to pray, I tried to explain to Jane what we had seen. I remember telling her and thinking how crazy I sounded. To this day, it still gives me a chill in my core. Whatever it was not of this earth, is all I know. A part of me wants answers so badly, but then I keep thinking maybe I'm better off not knowing exactly what it was. Jane and I lost touch over the years but did reconnect eventually. We talked about that night, as it was always the elephant in the room. She told me that following that incident, all of the crosses in her mom's house would randomly turn upside down for a couple weeks after this happened to us. It only stopped when Jane's mom went around the house very deep in prayer and blessed it. Jane and John lived with her at the time. Did something follow them home? I've never seen anything like that again, and I pray I never will. So I don't really know where to share this experience that happened to me a few years ago, but I thought y'all would have some insight on what happened. So in 2019, my brother, my best friend, and I were riding our bicycles across the United States to raise money for a cancer charity. Because we were doing this, it meant we were camping every single night, most often in town parks or campgrounds if they have them. This particular night in the middle of the trip we arrived in Napoleon, North Dakota, literally the definition of the middle of nowhere. The evening was entirely normal until just after the sun went down. As I was laying in my sleeping bag under a pavilion in this town's only park, I could hear faint radio static, almost like someone was flipping through channels, picking up bits and pieces of songs and commercials on the radio. The sound grew louder and louder until it was undeniable and all that my brother and I could hear. Because we just finished biking 70 miles that day and had 60 more tomorrow, I was pissed and wanted my sleep, so I left the pavilion to go yell at some loud other camper. As soon as I got up, I noticed two things. One, I looked at my phone for the time. I noticed it was around 1:30 a.m., which couldn't be possible because I don't even recall falling asleep, and it felt like I literally just got back from dinner at around 8:30 p.m. And two, the campsite and downtown were totally and completely empty. The town was dead. By this time I got a little weirded out but decided to continue investigating. I continued following the static, and it led me to multiple places around Napoleon, North Dakota. First it took me to the water tower, then the main street, and finally it was leading me out into this large cornfield on the edge of town. I then realized that this sound was almost shifting in the wind, coming from different places just moments after it came from one direction. I then decided not to follow it into the field, because duck that, and went back to my sleeping bag to get some sleep. But the most concerning part happened then. I put in earbuds to block out the static, and just then, the volume of said static only increased. The noise was coming from inside my head. After a restless evening, I woke up to a day of cycling 60 miles in a downpour, but my head was finally silent. I asked my brother if he heard the same thing, and he said he did, but he just assumed it was some other camper. But again, the site and quite literally the entire town were entirely empty. This is unrelated, but that morning I received news that my childhood dog died, launching me into my first ever experience with grief. Probably unrelated, but coincidence? Interesting and bizarre phenomena occurring in my old home? Let me just preface things with the fact that I'm a skeptic. I'm the guy who is slow or unwilling to believe in the paranormal. But in recent weeks, I'm starting to change this outlook. My wife and I recently moved into an older house. It was just completely renovated, as it had been abandoned for approximately 2 years. I'm a college student, so we don't have a lot of money currently. The home was originally built in the 1960s, and its age shows. We live alone. So, ever since we moved in, my wife, and many of our friends and family who occasionally visit, have heard faint but clear footsteps seeming to originate from other parts of the house. I originally chalked it up as rodents in the attic, but there are times where we can clearly hear solid and distinct footsteps. I'll go and check all the rooms of the house to find nothing. And no, we don't use any drugs or psychedelics. I'm a part-time paramedic and reservist in the military. I'd be thrown out if I did. The footsteps never really bothered me. Being the skeptical that I am, I just refused to believe it to be paranormal and continued to believe there was a logical or scientific explanation. But in the last week, there have been events occurring in the house that have started to make me believe our house is truly experiencing something paranormal. One morning, for example, as I am getting up for work at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, my wife and I are sitting on the bed talking about the day ahead. All of a sudden, we hear the distinct footsteps and then hear our microwave in the nearby kitchen beep a few times, then start. I immediately walk to the kitchen, thinking a local transient person broke into our house, to find the microwave on and counting down from 16 seconds. I turn it off and check the house. All of the doors and windows are locked, and our hypersensitive pit bull is sound asleep in his bed. The second unusual event happened this morning. Again, I am waking up for work at 4:30 a.m. My wife wakes up with me, as she usually does, and we start to discuss our plans for the day. Mid-conversation, we hear those distinct but faint footsteps followed by what sounded like a bowl being placed or dropped on our kitchen table. I again immediately walk out to discover two of our bowls are placed down onto the floor of the kitchen, and one of the cabinets is open. And again, all of the doors and windows are shut and locked. I'd like to think there is a logical explanation for this all. The house is old, and according to our next door neighbor, a squatter lived in the house until he died from an odd. So perhaps this is relevant to what we are experiencing, if this is indeed paranormal. What are your thoughts? Weird encounters during the blue moon. Hello everyone. I'm here to share what happened to me and my husband during the last full moon. I am a psychic, I don't talk to the dead, but I can sense entities. I have a strong connection to nature and the moon. For this blue moon, we decided to go camping in the Ouija region, an area we frequent because of its spiritual energy. When we arrived, we noticed a natural clearing, a circle formed by trees and giant boulders, too large for humans to move, that must have been there for centuries. We were greeted by a large white rat with strange black eyes. I tried to shove it away, but it wouldn't leave, it just stared at me. I got closer, and it finally ran off. We decided to meditate there. I had brought my crystals to recharge, and as I began setting everything up, my husband told me to be quiet and look, there was a fox staring at him. I couldn't see any fox, but he swore it was there. I continued unpacking my crystals, and who do I see? The rat is still staring at me and refusing to leave. For some reason, I shivered with fear, but I pressed on. I took out my pendulum and started to meditate, but I felt drained, so I left everything on the table. I should mention that my husband has his own spirituality, but he's very skeptical and not as involved as I am. Curious about how it works, he picked up the pendulum and began asking me questions. He was sitting in the middle of the clearing, and suddenly, when he held the pendulum, it started swinging wildly. When I took it, nothing happened, it only worked with him. It couldn't have been a prank because 1, I trust him, 2, he was visibly shocked, and 3, he didn't even know how the pendulum worked, yet suddenly he knew exactly what to do. We started joking about how he might be developing his own abilities, but then, who shows up? The rat, sitting on a rock, watching us. Suddenly, my husband said he felt strange and wanted to go back to the cabin. I felt a heavy energy, as if the trees had suddenly dimmed and nature didn't want us there. We went inside, but the cabin had a large glass wall, so we could see what was happening outside. We were terrified. The fox and the rat were there, staring at us through the glass, and they stayed there until late at night. We were terrified that we couldn't even peek out from under the covers. I know it sounds silly, but it's not normal for a rat and a fox to stare at you through a window for hours. Around 2 a.m., though I might be wrong about the time, I felt the energy dissipate and told my husband that whatever it was passing. Suddenly, we heard a horn-like sound echoing through the valley, and the animals left. We can't figure out what happened, we're experienced travelers with open minds, but this time, it was really creepy, and we can't understand why. If anyone has an explanation, I'd love to hear it. Thank you in advance. The Bro Fairies. I moved to California for the first time as a 19-year-old, and less than a few months later I was 20 while celebrating one of my best friends from college's 21st birthday. We graduated around the same time and got our first industry jobs in the same studio, so for his celebration, all we did was share a bottle of Captain by a crappy apartment pool, and we've never laughed more. I do not condone drinking heavily or carelessly, but I was a dumb kid. It was an unopened bottle, but the two of us started fading in and out of consciousness way too early on, like a second shot early, and realized right away that something was up. Now, even though we recognized this, we were both pretty underexperienced with drinking and figured maybe our tolerance was just whack. I remember a handful of blips from before I made it safely back into my apartment. Mindlessly scrolling on Tinder. My buddy mentioned feeling sick and was going to go to my place and crash on the couch. Me explaining that I was going to stay outside a bit longer. And finally, what I refer to as the Bro Fairies. 3 young men, close to my age, in a way reminding me of myself, wearing matching garments of clothing in different colors. Tank tops, shorts, and baseball caps. One green, one blue, and one pink. I can't at all recall their faces, but I do remember them helping me up off the ground after I must have blacked out by the pool and helping me up the stairs to my apartment door. They brought me the last of my liquor, and I said thank you in a sincere, albeit stumbling, fashion. My college buddy was passed out on my couch, and I stumbled to my bedroom. The next morning I reminded him of the three helpful gentlemen, and he couldn't help but comment on how bizarre their description was and if I was sure I hadn't dreamed it even though we both blacked out from the alcohol. I know they were very real and did me a great service. Around the age of 20 or 21, I was walking back to my house after getting a taxi back to my friend's house 5 minutes down the road from the pub. Our neighborhood is basically a mashup of council estate and suburb, so the area is a labyrinth of dimly lit footpaths and alleyways between roads, and between the two houses is the back entrance to a primary school with street lights at either end and no illumination in between. Halfway down this path, I got the odd sensation of the air around me suddenly going very still, despite there being a strong breeze the whole rest of the walk. I stopped and turned towards the school, and I could swear that in the shadows against the fence I could see the shape of a sitting dog, though the head of this creature must have been nearly 6 feet off of the ground as it was nearly eye level with me. At first I thought I was imagining it until I saw the shape start to move as if tilting its head to study me. Survival instincts kicked in, and I looked dead ahead and started backing away at a regular stride, trying to keep it in my peripheral vision. I got about as far back as being stood under the street lamp again, and I'm positive that I saw this shape slink out into the middle of the path and leap into one of the gardens. I even heard the rustling and snapping of branches as the shape went through the hedge. A few moments later, the breeze seemed to return, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. Never seen anything like it again, but any time I've ever taken that path, since I've always felt very uneasy. Witch in Tree/Shadow Woman. Night 1, my friend and I were forced to share a room without a fan or air conditioning during the Indian summer. We opened windows to let air in. As we sat chatting, I noticed a shadow woman shoot past our window in the veranda. Mind you, this was 3 a.m. and everyone was sleeping. I say shadow woman because this thing had a shawl on, and it pushed past the clothes hanging on the line. Not to mention it was a bloody dead end, the direction it was going in. We both went out looking, expecting to find someone playing a prank on us. But there was no one. We came in, locked the windows, and went to sleep. Night 2, the next morning I woke up to find my friend had already left, so I didn't get the chance to discuss what we saw. I called a cousin and asked him to come over and stay a night with me. He agreed and came over. Again, we were sleeping in the room with no AC or fan, so my cousin, not knowing what happened the night before, opened up the windows. As we were sharing a bed, I thought it best left opened and didn't mention anything to him. Around 3 a.m. My cousin fell asleep fast, but I couldn't. I kept noticing a strange light in a tree, in the garden beyond the veranda. At first I thought it was a firefly, but then there were two. They grew larger and were very fiery. I couldn't look away, they had some kind of hold on me. I had a feeling something wasn't right, but my eyes were fixated. There, right in front of my eyes, I could see something manifest. It was a dark woman standing up in the tree. Those weren't fireflies but her eyes, hypnotic balls of fire. Right about now I was in a sort of panic as to what in the hall I was witnessing. On the other hand, I was in a hypnotic trance, which filled me with terrible fear and undesirable curiosity. I must have watched it for hours as it manifested bit by bit, slowly forming into the hideous form it presented. I could see hands with fingers like smoke flickering as she motioned for me to go towards her. She was dressed in a dark shawl. Her constant motioning intrigued me. What could she want? But my instinct told me, no. Don't go there. However, I just couldn't fight the urge, an unnatural urge that was overwhelming. Those eyes seemed to blaze with fury as I stared and contemplated what was happening. I stood up. Duck it, I said. What's the worst that could happen? I asked myself. I built up my courage and decided to contact this entity, whatever it was. As I moved forward slowly but surely, believe it or not, I accidentally stepped on my cousin, who was sharing the bed with me. What the duck are you doing? He asked me. The lady in the tree is calling me, I replied. As soon as I uttered those words, he grabbed and wrestled me down onto the bed, saying, "Don't you dare." The next thing I remember is trembling under a blanket he covered me with, almost going into shock thinking what just happened. I looked out as my cousin went to close the window to see if that monstrosity was still there, but no, it wasn't. And that's the end of that instance of my life. A bizarre childhood encounter in a New England forest. What was it? Here's a little context. This happened when I was a child, and to this day I really can't explain it. I'm going to tell the story as objectively as possible without adding my own interpretation because I'd love to tap into some group intelligence and see what the listeners think. I think it's important to mention that I'm now 35 years old and a very logical, evidence-based scientific person. I work as an analyst for a large organization and deal with information, statistics, and numbers. I'm a big follower of Occam's razor and believe that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. In case it's important, I'm a guy. This encounter occurred when I was about 6 years old, in New Hampshire. At the time, my family was renting a renovated house that had been built in the 1700s. Some of the original house remained on the exterior. I recall a hole in one of the modern interior walls that one could peek through and see an 18th century toilet, which was on the second floor and was basically a wooden seat with a hole. The waste would fall down a vertical column in the wall and into a bucket that could be accessed through a small door from outside the house at ground level. Admittedly an awesome place to live as a kid if you're the adventurous type, which I was. The property sat on 80 acres that included a large forest and a small pond about a mile back behind the house. My dad, sister, and I would often walk out to the pond, which entailed a 15-minute journey through the dense New England forest. We called the pond Beaver Pond, owing to the many beavers that lived in the area. My sister is 2 years younger than I, so she was about 4 at the time. One day, the three of us made our usual walk to the pond in the early evening. Soon after we arrived at the pond, for some reason I wanted to go back to the house. I don't believe it was anything unusual. I might have had to pee or something. As a kid, I was pretty particular about only going to the bathroom in a real bathroom. My parents were a little overly proper about those things, and I was a little neurotic. Halfway along the pathway home, the forest had started to dim a bit, and I got uncomfortable, so I began to run. I'm not sure why I wasn't looking in front of me. I might have been glancing to the sides and back as my paranoia mounted, and suddenly, bam, I ran into it. Shocked, I stepped back, and this is what I remember seeing. It was at least 3 times my height and stood on 2 legs. It was completely covered in long, gray-brown, slightly matted hair, not fur but hair, similar to a human's, think cousin-it. I recall it looking like a sloth, especially the head, that was walking upright on hind legs with very slow movements, almost as if it were moving in slow motion. I don't remember any facial features. Its arms were held up, kind of like a kangaroo's front legs. Bizarrely, it had a red ribbon or bow around its neck. I didn't sense any malice or aggression from the creature. If anything, I got the feeling that it was as surprising as I was. As soon as I got over my shock, I ran around it and continued running back to our house. I glanced back and saw it slowly turning its entire body around to look at me as I raced home. A couple days ago I asked my mom if she remembered me telling her about the incident, and she did and added a couple of details. She said that I did describe a face and eyes watching me and that at some point it hid behind a tree to watch me. I don't recall this part. Epilogue: when I was 18, I was watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries with my late father, and a segment about a Sasquatch sighting came up. After the segment, my dad told me that once, when we lived in New Hampshire, he took my sister in the family station wagon for a drive through the woods around our house. He said that at one point both he and my sister saw something brown race across the road in front of them. At first, I thought it was a deer, he said. But I quickly realized that it had a humanoid shape and stood on 2 legs, taking giant strides. I recently asked my sister about this, and she remembers it well. So, there you have it. I know all too well about the fallibility of memory and readily admit that there are a lot of inconsistencies. A red bow, seriously? But I've documented exactly what I remember, no more or less. At the time of the encounter, I didn't know anything about ghosts, monsters, or Bigfoot. I did, however, have an intense phobia of primate faces for the rest of my childhood, up until I hit adolescence. Some people have suggested I undergo regression hypnosis, but to be very honest, I'm a little too afraid to. I can't shake the sense that there was more to the encounter that I can't remember or was somehow lost. There could be a perfectly normal explanation. In fact, this is most likely. However, I haven't been able to come up with anything that makes sense, other than the whole thing being the overactive imagination of a child. So to the thing I encountered in a New Hampshire forest as a child, I really want to know what you were and wouldn't even be opposed to getting another look at you. I have a UFO story, and nobody believes me. Even my friend doesn't truly believe in my story. He missed it because he wouldn't get up. I don't know where else to put this, so I'll share it here. I was camping with my best friend. It was a weekend trip in early spring a few years ago, and the campsite was actually on one of his family members' properties that sort of overlooked a lake in upstate New York. This was a somewhat small lake, too small for sailing, and was surrounded by undeveloped land. Where we camped, we had sort of a downward view of the lake and the land beyond it. Our campsite was next to a berm surrounding a very large stone with a small clearing next to the tree line. We had our tent under the canopy of the tree line. We went to bed well after dark. I had the tent flap unzipped so that I could lay there looking out, but had the screen panel on the tent door zipped up because of bugs. I could see the far side of the lake, maybe a little bit of the water, from where I was lying. But mostly I could see the night sky. I saw a round light that was maybe about the same size as a dime if I held a dime out at arm's length. It was a pale off-white or cream color, and it was surrounded by a haze that was an off-white to extremely light blue color that surrounded the round light like a very rudimentary cartoon flame might surround something. It was almost like a haze. It flew from the left of where I was camped to a point over the far side of the lake, where it stopped and hovered. At that point, I tried waking my friend up to look at the light. I pleaded with him. He didn't want to wake up and kept telling me to go to sleep. Then the object flew off to the right, out of sight. I was extremely excited by all this. By the point it flew off out of sight, I was sitting up and shoving my friend to wake up. He rolled over to at least face the tent door and threw an arm over me and told me to get some sleep. He never lifted his head up. And then the object, whatever it was, came shooting back into my line of sight from some point off to my right, heading away from me at a tremendous speed and gaining altitude. But when it came back into view, it didn't look like a sphere. If you can hold a coin on its edge at arm's length, you would see a circle, which is how it looked when I first saw it as it flew over the lake. If you were to hold a coin at arm's length and tip the top edge towards you like 45 degrees, that's what it looked like as it shot off into the sky. It moved at blistering speed as it shot off. I had a clear line of sight of the sky it flew off into. And it gained altitude until it disappeared from sight, far off in the distance. I got really scared then. I made my friend wake up and stay awake with me. I did eventually fall asleep, but that was the weirdest thing I ever saw. I lived behind a graveyard. Yep, that's right. My family's house backs up to a graveyard. In fact, we back up to one of the oldest cemeteries in the state. From my understanding, the land my neighborhood was developed on in the 1970s was originally a fruit tree farm. Each of the homes on the street still has at least one fruit tree on their property as a relic of the farm. My family had an apple tree. I know that these stories should always be taken with a grain of salt. I consider myself a pretty level-headed person. My parents are physicians, and we operate under a very practical, realistic way of navigating life. And even with that understanding of how the world works, we have experienced things that we have never been able to explain. Growing up, the house always gave me an uneasy feeling. I constantly had the feeling I wasn't alone. I've had something knock on my window in the middle of the night, I've heard footsteps down the hallway, I've seen an apparition, witnessed things fly off the table, and had countless other experiences, big and small, that were just normal occurrences. My mom also had interesting experiences, including old toys turning on when they have no batteries, being pushed from behind while gardening, and seeing unexplained things from time to time. There would be periods of more activity and periods of quiet. During the active moments, we would refer to the house being loud. It was the loudest when one of us would get sick. Perhaps one of the strangest moments was when we found a bone in our backyard. When the bone was examined by our local forensics team, it was concluded that the bone was part of the end of a human femur with an unknown origin. They didn't give a date, but they did say it was likely several hundred years old. Weirdly enough, we found it by accident. One morning it was sitting on top of a flower bed, maybe 20 feet from the house. At this point, the bone is family lore, as we have never been able to explain its existence. There has never been any evidence to suggest someone was buried outside of the cemetery lines, but it certainly makes you wonder. No other bones were ever found. If you're wondering what we did with the bone, well, we kept it. Actually, when the very quick investigation concluded, a police officer came by to drop off the bone. Weird move, but we didn't know what to do, so we took it. Since that moment in 2006, it has sat on the mantel above our fireplace. The bone ended setting in motion a specific series of events that ended up coming to our family's aid later on in life, so we keep it up as a reminder of that moment. I saw a ghost in my house, but no one in my family believes me. This happened quite a few years ago, but I can still remember it like it was yesterday. This wasn't a ghost that I saw maybe out of the corner of my eye for a split second or from super far away. I noticed it up close and personal for a solid 5 to 6 seconds, which, when you're seeing a ghost, seems like an eternity. I was lying on my couch at night when all of a sudden I saw a spectral figure made of blue light emerge from around the corner of my hallway and start walking toward me. He was made of light, but he was also transparent as well, so I could see through him. He couldn't have been more than 10 to 15 feet away from me. I was completely floored, perplexed, amazed, and shocked, all at the same time. He was in such great detail that I could tell what type of clothing he was wearing, some type of military garment, and that he was a young, Asian male in his 20s. He had a stoic, somber look on his face, almost sad. As he walked toward me, he left a trail of undulating blue light behind him that kind of waved up and down. This lasted for a solid 5 or 6 seconds, the entire time my eyes are completely wide open, and I can feel my heartbeat start to increase. And as quickly as he came, he slowly vanished into thin air as he got closer to me. I've never seen anything like it before in my life, and I doubt I ever will see anything like it ever again. I told my family about it, and they said, "Oh, you've always had a vivid imagination." However, my response was, "No, I know what I saw. There's no way what I saw wasn't real. I've never believed in ghosts before, thinking that anyone who does has to be certified crazy, but after that night, I truly believe in ghosts and some sort of afterlife." For some reason, I didn't feel scared when I saw him, or even after. The dominant feeling I had was pure amazement and bewilderment at what I had just witnessed. Everyone always says that when you see a ghost, it is scary, but that wasn't the case with me at all. Am I crazy? Has anyone ever seen anything similar? Please share your thoughts. Knocks at my front door, but nobody's there. I was just cleaning my room yesterday afternoon when suddenly I heard an awkward, persistent yet soft knock on my front door. Normally I don't even go to the door when someone knocks because I live right next to the laundry room at my apartment complex, and people often use me as their own personal bank for quarters or change to do laundry. But this knocking was just so strange and unusual. I had to see who it was. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there, and the knocking paused for a moment as I leaned my weight into the door. This sent a chill down my spine. Then it started up again as I was still looking through the peephole, this awkward, inhuman, lackadaisical knocking. After a few minutes of continuous knocking, I realized I needed to take out the trash, so I just opened the door and walked right through it like nothing was happening, which made it stop. Later that night, I was cleansing my apartment to make sure this entity didn't come inside to bug me. This happens to me a lot. Then, as I was cleansing and saying prayers, it began tapping at the window. So I looked straight at the window and said, "Only love can flourish here," and went on with the cleansing. Then it stopped tapping. Not the most exciting paranormal tale, but I know this is a common occurrence that can sometimes get out of control. Well, that's how I got my old tappin' bastard to go away, so maybe it will work for you too. Stories of UFOs and other strange phenomena leading to my own bizarre findings in the Australian outback. I want to share an intriguing local story that has left me both baffled and slightly frightened ever since. I live in rural Australia, near some wild and remote places. Out west is a small village called Torrington. Over the years, I've heard many stories of UFO sightings and paranormal phenomena apparently originating from a nearby location to here called the Bingy Gate. This gate the area is nicknamed for is the entrance to an exceptionally large property, recently acquired by an American buyer. This could be relevant. There is also another property nearby, which comes in later in my story. It's important to reiterate the remoteness of this location and the harshness of the bushland in this region. It is not somewhere anyone would find by accident, that's for sure. It may also be relevant to note that this area is extremely rich in uranium and titanium, but because of the impenetrable nature of much of the landscape, it's not mine that I know of. So firstly, I want to share the accounts I have heard from locals that encouraged me to eventually investigate this area, leading to some truly bizarre results. So here's a list of accounts. My first account is the most disturbing, and I trust the source of this account completely and the others I'm documenting here. These people have no reason to lie, and many stories corroborate with each other. About 10 years ago, the son of my parents' friend, let's call him Terry, and his best friend, Mark, from childhood went out hunting near the Bingy Gate. They were near an old campsite with an old bus long abandoned. After dark, the pair saw a menacing large red light coming down a rocky, forested hillside through the trees. There was no road. Panicked, they started shooting at the light. This had no effect, so they ran to the old bus and barricaded themselves in. Apparently at this point there was banging on the side of the bus. Terrified, they realized they had to get out of there. Mark opened the door, preparing to flee. At this point, the situation becomes even more unsettling. According to Terry, when Mark opened the door and saw what greeted him outside, Terry couldn't see out from his position. His face drained of color and reflected pure shock and horror. Terry asked him what he saw and got no response. Now it gets even weirder. Terry was never to hear from his lifelong best friend again after that night. The next day, after eventually making a run for it, Mark packed and moved to the city without a word to anyone. No one will ever know what exactly Mark saw that made him react like that. Truly creepy. The second account comes from another Torrington local. There is an old lady that has lived out there her whole life. She reports red lights and saucer-shaped progressions in the ground have been occurring as long as she can remember. So these sightings go back a long way. Third account from my parents. Their property is about 40 kilometers NW from Torrington. They have seen red lights in the sky on a few occasions originating from that area. Other people who tried to investigate bingy at night have fled in fear. No one has been able to stay. Others have also reported red lights and what sounded like a camera flash. This is what Terry's father experienced when he investigated after his son's experience. He said it was so sinister that he had to run and leave. A trusted local resident informed me that he's seen a US military helicopter flying over out there. Bit weird in the middle of nowhere, Australia. What are they interested in out there? Locals have heard strange frequency noises out there and drilling noises. I've heard this myself. A few years prior to my trip to Bhutan, my father and his friend were planning an investigation. The night before, my dad had a strange dream of bee-like beings referring to themselves as the caretakers. They told him if he went out there, he wouldn't come back. Obviously, he didn't go. Mum said something weird happened that night. It felt like there was a heavy presence above the house, like there was a craft there. She said she felt like she couldn't move until it left. Weird. This is more out there, but interesting nonetheless. My parents wouldn't make this up. Okay, so this was enough for us to mount our own investigation of this place. To be on the safe side, we went during the day. After driving for miles through wild bushland, we find the gate. The cicadas were so loud it was creating an eerie frequency. The whole place felt eerie. So very isolated. Now the story begins to get even creepier. I have attached photos and comments as documentation. Neighboring the bingy gate was another gate to another property. On this gate was a sign identifying the property as a research facility, apparently run by the government. This sign is fake. It looks nothing like an official Australian government facility sign would look like, and Snowgum Downs Research Facility does not exist. Snowgums don't even grow up north. This was further confirmed by what was seen by my friend Chris shortly upon climbing the fence into the property, a trespassers will be shot sign. My friend saw this and a number of other similar signs and panicked and made a run back to us. The government would not use a sign like this, I don't think. I should note as well that the entrance road to this property looked long unused. So there's something on this property that someone really does not want people to know about or find. I thought the signs were unnecessarily aggressive. Now obviously, with the account I shared above and my own experience, something really bizarre is going on here. I assume there is certainly a link between this threatening, most likely fake research facility and the strange phenomenon that's been observed over that property. When I returned home and looked up the location on Google Earth, I found the area was blurred out. I couldn't even find the dirt road we approached on. I could find zero info about the facility. So this has bothered me for a long while. I just have to know what is going on out there. I was so creeped out after going there that I felt weird and perturbed for days. I'd stumbled on something truly strange and possibly dangerous. Anyway, thanks for listening, and please let me know what you guys think of this. I hope you found it interesting. What are your theories as to what is going on out there? I remember I was 9 or 10 years old. It was a hot summer afternoon, and I was walking my dog after school. I was going down a straight path between trees and houses in a residential part of my tiny hometown. To the right side of the path I was on, there was another path that went slightly downhill, cutting through a lawn and intersecting my path at about a 120-degree angle. At the top of that path, I saw a woman walking downhill. She was very elegant, dressed in a yellow and orange dress. She caught my eye because, in my town in the early 2000s in Eastern Europe, it was rare to see someone dressed so beautifully and in bright colors. As the woman walked downhill, I looked away for a moment to check on my dog to make sure he wasn't eating anything off the ground. When I looked back to the right, the woman who had been halfway down the path crossing mine was back at the top of the hill, in the same exact pose, walking down again. There was no way she could have run back there because I had only looked away for a maximum of 3 seconds. I remember feeling a bit spooked, sensing that something was off. I turned back and headed home. On my way, I looked back to see if the woman was still there, but she had disappeared. This left me feeling very uneasy, and I told my mom about it immediately after I got home. She dismissed it, saying maybe the woman went back up the path because she dropped something and needed to pick it up. But this happened in a span of 3 seconds, and she would have needed to go back up the path about 200 meters. And how did she disappear? To this day, I think about that situation, and it was almost 20 years ago. I remember exactly how the woman looked, how the weather felt that day, what I was doing, and how my dog also seemed a bit shaken as we were going back home. Okay, my dad is not the type of person to lie about things, especially to this length, so I 100% believe him on this. Years ago, during my dad's teenage years, he and his friends were enjoying a picnic in George J. Koch Park. All of a sudden light filled the area, and this was in the middle of the night. He said that the trees didn't even make any shadows, the light was so bright. They thought it was just ball lightning, something that kind of just happened where he lived. But when he looked up, it was a different story. There were 3 absolutely massive circular lights above him, each one a different color, purple, green, and blue. They kept moving in a pattern, still staying in their triangular form, rotating into like each light filling each other's spot after they moved. This unknown aircraft was about 50 feet above them. After staring for like 10 seconds, his friend Robert starts to scream that he has seen this before, and they sprinted back to my dad's house. As they ran, they saw the aircraft disappear and reappear over and over as it traveled down his neighborhood. Afterwards, they asked Robert what he meant when he said he saw that before. He said he had no memory of saying that. His watch stopped precisely at 1:52 a.m. that night. I'm not sure if this is relevant. After I was told this, me and my dad speculated that it was probably some classified government aircraft, as he lived near some government bases. When I did search for some other occurrences, I found a farmer had seen the exact same thing. I can't find it now, but if someone else has seen that, I would love to hear who saw it. Okay, so I want to tell you guys a story about my uncle's house, and I will tell everything as told to me by those who have had experiences in the house. I would like to preface the story by saying that in boarding school or college, I can't remember exactly which, my uncle was playing a game of Ouija with his friends and claims they briefly encountered a demonic spirit. My uncle Jim moved to Miami in the late 90s and worked as a waiter. In the early to mid 2000s he became a realtor. My uncle did pretty well for himself, never got married or had kids, and was able to buy a lovely house in South Beach. He and his dog lived in the house alone. Uncle Jim never reported any odd activity in the house until he decided to put a pool in the backyard. He now believes that someone was buried in that backyard, and he disturbed the spirit. A few months after putting the pool in, Jim started to notice some paranormal activities that became more prevalent. At first, his dog would bark uncontrollably at nothing. Dogs tend to sense spirits. Time went on, and things got weirder. My uncle's entertainment system would turn on, TV, and surround sound speakers that had to be manually turned on would randomly turn on and off. My grandmother, no bullshit lady, also experienced the sound system, TV, and random light flickering while staying at the house alone. Jim said things got weirder. His garage even opened and closed while he was home at times. I know what you're thinking, shitty electrician, nothing paranormal. One night my uncle woke to a medicine ball rolling across his bedroom, with all doors and windows shut. When he got up, he thought he heard a conversation in the guest room down the hall. I also got a really eerie feeling in that guest room, and at times he said he thought he heard people speaking in there. Fast forward a few months, and Jim was visiting us for Christmas and showed us a picture of a blood stain on the wall, which was a straight line with a slight smudge at the bottom. It was about as wide and long as a straw, and there was no sign it came from a fly or anything in the house. The stain was on the wall above the stairs, higher than anyone could reach. It didn't come from him or his dog. My uncle returned to Miami, and things got more bizarre. He started to wake up in the middle of the night with the TV in his bedroom blasting white noise and a gray screen. He claims that one night he saw the face of an old man on the screen. Jim called the cable guy to come fix his TV. When the cable guy came to fix the TV, he pointed out to my uncle that there was a crack forming on the ceiling above his bed. When my uncle had a carpenter come check out the crack, they did some investigating and figured out it was a stress crack. The beams in the ceiling directly above Jim's bed were slowly concaving and were believed to collapse completely in the near future if not fixed. Uncle Jim moved out of the house a few months later. The woman who bought the house from him died only a few months later inside the house. I don't remember what her cause of death was. My uncle believes the spirit on the TV was warning him of impending danger. The family's haunted barn. So for some background, the barn has been in my family for 2 generations. My grandparents and now my uncle. Someone had committed suicide by hanging in the barn before they lived there. Feminine screams have been heard near the barn. I do not have many spooky stories, so these are mostly my dad's as he grew up there. Plausible explanations at the bottom. One day my dad was messing around with a football in the barn. He threw it in the loft only for it to come back to him in a perfect spiral. He threw the ball while yelling up to whoever was up there. No one answered, but the ball came back. He kept playing catch for around a minute until the ball didn't come back. He climbed the ladder and only saw hay. My dad was playing cops and robbers in the barn with his friends. They decided the gutter was for the people caught. The gutters were a slightly lowered part on the inside of the barn for manure. My dad was caught and was standing in the gutters when he saw a red liquid seeping up from the grates. He and his friends panicked and ran out. My dad was part of the tough crowd in high school. Halloween was coming up, and they weren't scared of ghosts. They pooled together and bought an Ouija board. Of course, the barn was a perfect place to go. Someone had died there after all. They placed their hands on the planchette and watched in fear as it started moving. They freaked out, jumping away from the board and leaving it there as they raced back to the house. One friend swore the ghost had followed him home. The teen refused to sleep alone, and for weeks after, he slept between his parents. When he was 17, my dad was getting ready to move out and join the army. He had to get rid of his motorcycle because he didn't have a place to store it. He had found a buyer and was showing him the bike. It was kept in a small underground offshoot of the barn. As they were talking it over, the old, half-broken radio suddenly started blaring organ music. My dad was a rock lover, he had never listened to anything else. The two guys were shocked and ran out as fast as they could. My dad checked out the radio the next day and saw the switch was in the off position and still covered in dust. From the way the story is told, it seems like the radio could have also been a cassette player and he only listened to his tapes, which is why the organ music freaked him out so much. This is the only story that actually freaks him out, and it is just because of the music. When I was little, my uncle had put up a rope in the middle of the barn, tying it up to a rope tie. All of us cousins had been born pretty close together, so leaping from the hay loft like Tarzan seemed to be a good way to keep all the kids occupied. I ran into the barn, beating everyone else. I grabbed the rope and clung to it with my hands and feet to cement my places first. Suddenly small black things fell from above around us. A few fell on my head. After a moment of shock, we looked around us and saw dead bats. They littered the floor around us. So this took place in the 90s for about half that decade. My aunt, uncle, and cousins lived in a big house at the base of a mountain. They are German but lived in the States. Their house was beautiful. After living there a year or so, they started experiencing small belongings going missing and reappearing and furniture in their living room being rearranged while they slept so they would wake up and be surprised. The entire dining room table would be moved or their lounge chairs turned, etc. They found this amusing and were unafraid at the possibility of it being paranormal. Soon after this, they started seeing little people dressed as garden gnomes. My family was planning to visit my aunt, so we had been warned of the activity, but it wasn't sinister in any way, and honestly, it sounded unbelievable, so we didn't fear it. My parents were convinced it was fiction. Anyway, we went to stay with them, and I experienced what they had told us about. 3 times I saw a small gnome run around a corner ahead of me. And when I say gnome, I mean a literal garden gnome. They looked like short, stout little old men with suspenders and tiny pointed hats. Because of their cartoonish appearance, it was entertaining to me as a child and never scary. I tried chasing them when I saw them, and one ran down the stairs to my cousin's room in the basement. But it vanished when I made it to the room. Another time I managed to chase around 2 corners, but again it vanished when I had hoped I was catching up to it. My sister, on this same visit, walked into the kitchen one afternoon and saw one of them sitting on the countertop with its legs dangling over and swinging, she said in a playful way. Then, when it saw that she noticed it, the gnome froze like a statue. She didn't go up to it but left the kitchen because she felt uneasy that it hadn't run away like most everyone else experienced and had my mom go back in there with her to check, and it was gone by then. She described the kitchen gnome the same way. He was dressed cartoonishly in suspenders, had tiny black boots on his feet, a white beard, and a pointed green hat. Before we left, we all went swimming in their pool out back. There was a great pile of boulders in their yard, and a few times all of us kids saw 1 or 2 gnomes peek out from behind a boulder as if they were spying on us but did not want to be seen. We splashed water in their direction, and they ducked away. That's all the sightings I recall, but my aunt and cousins saw them many more times over the course of living there. For some detail and to hopefully answer questions, let me explain some things. These gnomes were seen by children and adults alike, and they were always described in the way I observed and described them here, looking like garden gnomes in little outfits. They all seemed to be male because they had beards. They were about a foot tall. They didn't give off any sinister or evil vibes. My aunt always described them as being curious and playful and simply wanting us to know that they were there. No one ever caught one, and this was way before cell phones, so no, they weren't caught on camera either. I guess there is no way to prove they were what was moving my aunt's furniture around as well, but she just assumed it was the way they liked to play, and she seemed pretty confident that the games and moving furniture were related. No, my aunt did not have any gnome decor on her lawn, so it's not as if those came to life, these were life on their own. I don't know where they vanished to. When I chased them, they simply disappeared behind corners or furniture if anyone pursued them. Again, they didn't give any evil vibes, but as an adult now, I am not so certain they were innocent and pure. I don't know why it was garden gnomes, but I have always wondered if it was connected to my aunt's heritage. I think the garden gnomes were popular in German culture or folklore, so I assumed that's why they frequented their house, but I really can't say for sure. They didn't make any sounds or talk, just movement. When my aunt moved houses, the gnomes were never seen again, so it seems they were attached to the property in some way, but it is important to note that no matter where my aunt lived, she and my cousins experienced some form of supernatural activity. So there it is. Any questions I will try to answer, and if anyone has any similar experiences or ideas on why these gnomes even existed, I'm interested to hear them. A bizarre occurrence that I can't explain. Earlier today, my friend T and I went over to our other friend's house, whose name is K. We have often had paranormal experiences at both of K's houses. Her parents are divorced and she lives at both houses, and we were talking about them. We decided to light a candle and ask questions and see if any spirits would flicker it once or twice for yes or no. We also set up 3 books on 3 sides of the candle to protect it from any potential airflow. We made it clear that we did not mean any harm and asked several questions, but nothing happened. My friend K then asked, "Are you from a different universe?" And the flame grew super small and almost went out, and then grew back to its regular size. We thought that was weird, but then said that we were grateful for our communication and were going to close our session and thanked whatever we were talking to. Then shit gets really weird. An hour or 2 later, me and Kay were sitting by at the bar counter while T slept on the sofa near us but in the living room. All of a sudden, Kay and I heard this sound that I simply cannot explain coming from across the room past T. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded almost futuristic, and later I said that it sounded like a portal opening, almost as if something had just entered the room from a different occupation of space, if that makes any sense. Immediately after that noise, Kay said she heard breathing coming from the hall that was across from us, and as I listened, I heard it too, but from behind us. T had woken up at that point and said that it was probably her, but we had heard both her and the other breathing separately, and they had sounded different. Me and Kay immediately decided to try again with the candle. So we lit it, and I said, "If there is something to hear with us, can you blow or snuff out the candle?" And immediately after I said that, the flame shrank and went out as if someone had snuffed it out with their fingers. Kay tried to light the candle again, but it simply wouldn't light. It wasn't as if there was a breeze that blew it out or anything. The flame from the match was completely still when against the wick, as if we were holding it up to a brick instead. We freaked out, and Kay shook out the match, and afterwards the wick burst into flame. As this was happening, I felt such a strong negative presence that I began shaking and crying. After the flame ignited, I heard the door to the garage violently shake, and T said she heard a tapping coming from the kitchen. I kept saying, "There is something negative here. I don't feel safe." The feeling was overwhelming, and I couldn't breathe. I said, "Thank you for communicating, goodbye," and immediately left the house. We all sat in Kay's car for a good 40 minutes after, and I was still shaking the whole time. This was definitely an experience that made my blood run cold. I instantly knew that we weren't alone. It was such a bizarre experience, especially with the sound we heard before the breathing. A bizarre experience I had as a kid. Me and my mom always have random conversations about things. Recently, we started talking about ghosts. I've always been quite skeptical of the paranormal and never believed in any kind of ghost story or anything. However, when I expressed this to my mom, she looked at me and said, "I have a story for you, but if I tell you, you would shit your pants." I was confused and asked her if the story was about her having an encounter with a ghost, but to my surprise, she said to me, "I never saw one, but you did." Now I was super confused. I have zero recollection of ever having an encounter with a ghost, but my mom proceeded to tell the story of when we lived in our first flat together. My parents are immigrants, and we moved to the UK when I was around 2 years old. Our first flat was in a small, very old town, and it was above a dry cleaners. There was a staircase that led up to our flat, and we were the only people that used those stairs. Now here's where it gets creepy. At night, my parents would hear footsteps going up and down those stairs when everyone was in the house. My parents thought nothing of it at first, but one day when I was alone with my mom in the kitchen, I told her, "Look, Mummy, doesn't that girl have a lovely dress?" My mom was so freaked out because there was no one else there. My dad gets home from work, and my mom tells him what happened. He looks at her and nods. Her name's Jessica. She's a little girl who died here years ago. Now this is the part that mind-ducked me. During the conversation, my mom tells me that my dad is a medium and has the ability to see ghosts. I am 20 years old, and this is the first time I'm ever hearing about this. So I call up my dad to see if my mom's story is legit. He said it was all true and that he didn't want to tell me about him being a medium, as he didn't want my perception of him to change. So what happened to Jessica? According to my dad, she died falling down those stairs. That's the reason we heard footsteps at night. He even told me that as a kid, I played with Jessica in the house, she was protecting me, and coincidentally, none of us ever fell down those stairs. Eventually, my mom got so freaked out about a ghost living with us that she asked my dad to take her away from us. He let her out of the house, and we never had any paranormal activity after that. Weird, right? Something called my name and smiled at me. Hi all, I'm Matt. Almost 10 years ago, I was in a relationship with this guy, I'll call him Craig for anonymity, who claimed he had a spirit that had been following him around since early childhood. According to Craig, it never caused any physical harm. It just clung to him and would occasionally reveal itself in bizarre ways. Craig's family was apparently very aware of this and believed it, claiming to have witnessed numerous bizarre occurrences over the years, all of which happened whenever Craig was around. Honestly, I didn't believe this for a second. Not at all. And because I didn't believe it, it felt like a red flag. Why would he make up something so random and bizarre and share it with me so out of the blue when nothing had warranted it? But being in my early 20s at the time, I chose to ignore it because he was great and seemed so normal otherwise. I suppose I eventually chose to believe that he genuinely believed, which was preferable to the idea that he would maintain such a lie for so long just to unsettle me. Still, I pulled a Dan Scully and reasoned that all the strange events he had experienced throughout his life must have had reasonable explanations. One night, Craig was staying over at my place. This was actually the first time we'd ever spent an entire night together. We talked, made future plans, made out, and listened to music. Before we knew it, it was 2 a.m., and this was around the time something really strange happened. We were both sitting on the floor of my bedroom, backs against the far wall opposite my bedroom door, looking for music videos to watch on my laptop, when 3 loud, swift knocks came from the door. I was so startled because it was extremely late and the only other person present in the house at the time was my mom, who had gone to sleep hours ago and only ever got up to use the bathroom. She certainly never knocked on my door at such a late hour, especially if I had company over. I silently questioned if I had imagined the knocks because it was late and I was feeling pretty tired. But no, because when I had looked over at Craig, he was also looking at the door. This is the part where I imagine a lot of listeners will decide this story is fake. But hey, I'm going to stay true to my experience, so here goes. Right before I'm about to call out to my mom, I hear a passionate male voice call my name, similar to how an angry father might shout at their child for breaking something valuable. It took Craig and I several minutes to finally muster up the courage to stand and creep over to the door. Before that, we'd comically stayed pressed against the wall, silently staring at the door and occasionally glancing at each other. I pressed my ear against the door and didn't hear anything, so I eventually opened it, but not before retrieving a golf club from my closet, and saw nothing. Just a normal dark hallway. Craig and I proceeded to check every spot in the house, even opening closet doors, and found nothing. While we did this, I remember feeling like eyes were burning into me, as if someone was angrily watching and judging my every move. It had given me goosebumps, but because we didn't find anyone, I had shrugged away that feeling. When Craig and I got into bed shortly after, I expressed feeling very creeped out, naturally. Craig nonchalantly replied something to the effect of, "I told you. I have a spirit that follows me around." I had been really unnerved by his reply. He had said it a little too matter-of-factly for my liking. Fast forward several weeks, when Craig is sleeping over at my place again. We were hanging out in the kitchen shortly after midnight when Craig received a call from his sister. He decided to step out into the backyard for the call. It's worth noting that the backyard connected to the kitchen via a large sliding glass door, so I could see him at all times, so long as I remained in the kitchen and he stayed by the door. It's also worth noting that the kitchen sink had a large window directly above it, a window that looked out to the side of the house. I mention this because I decided to wash dishes while Craig took the call. While washing dishes, I alternated between looking out the window in front of me and glancing to my right, where I could see Craig leaning against the glass door as he conversed with his sister. When I got to a particularly dirty dish, I stopped looking out the window and to my right, so I could focus on getting the dish clean. When I achieved this, I looked back up at the window and immediately took a couple steps back. Standing right outside the window was Craig, who was now smiling at me. And I don't mean an ordinary smile. I'm talking a highly exaggerated grin, with lots of teeth showing and eyes blown wide open. If you've seen the recent horror movie Smile, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was very similar to that. After I collected myself, I laughed and shook my head at Craig before gesturing at him to knock it off and come back inside. But he stayed completely motionless, eyes still burning into mine, his grin never faltering. He didn't even blink. After another 10 seconds or so went by, I began feeling very unsettled. Mind you, I had still been under the impression that he was just trying to make me feel uncomfortable via his version of a joke, so I was mostly unnerved that he would commit to the gag for so long, more than anything else. I certainly didn't consider it could be anything else, even after the previous incident. Out of nowhere, while I was still looking directly at Craig through the window, I heard the sliding glass door open from my right. When this happened, I looked away from the window and saw Craig coming back inside from the backyard. When I looked back at the window, the smiling Craig was gone. I want to make it crystal clear. Unless Craig had secret teleportation powers I didn't know about, there was just no way he could have moved from the window to the sliding glass door while I was staring right at him. It would have been impossible. When I told Craig what I'd just experienced, he said, "I believe you. Something like that has happened before." Craig just grabbed my hand and led me to my bedroom, and I felt eyes burning into my back the whole way there, up until Craig shut my bedroom door. Even then, after we got into bed, I could still sense something standing on the other side of the door. We split up not long after, due to something unrelated, believe it or not, and nothing strange has happened since, almost a full decade later. I never feel like I'm being watched, nor have I ever seen anything strange. If you've listened this far, thanks. And I would love to hear your thoughts. I've had other bizarre experiences before meeting Craig, but none of them were as obvious as this one. I'll admit I'm still somewhat of a skeptic, but whenever I try to come up with a reasonable explanation for the above experiences, I always come up empty. I typically forget about these encounters, but this time of the year naturally brings the memories back, even though they happened at a completely different time of the year. Could my town be a hotspot for extraterrestrial/interdimensional activity? I can remember my mother telling a story when I was younger that has stuck with me since. My father was an over-the-road truck driver, so he wasn't around much. That left my mother to pretty much raise my little brother, little sister, and me on her own. One night she was awoken by a bright light shining through her bedroom window. She said it was as if someone had parked their car and directly turned their bright headlights on, pointing toward her bedroom window. Her first instinct was to get up and check on us kids. She had noticed that the bright light wasn't confined to her bedroom, as it was shining through every window in our house. She saw that I was accounted for, as was my little sister, but she couldn't find my little brother, who was about 3 at the time. She's scouring the house and finally sees him in our laundry room, opening the back door that leads to our backyard. And as soon as he opens the door, the brilliant light shines in. And she wakes up. She's accepting that this was all a dream when her eyes begin to focus on the dark of her bedroom. She sees a small figure at the foot of her bed. As she sits up to see what exactly it is, it scampers off into the darkness of our house. Then she wakes up again. A dream in a dream, she's telling herself. Later that day, she's hanging up laundry and conversing with our neighbor woman, who asks her a question. "Did you guys have a party late last night?" "No," my mother replies. "Why?" Our neighbor goes on to tell her that she and her husband had a disagreement the day before, and she decided to sleep in her son's room. At about 3 a.m., she was awoken by a bright light emanating from around our house. Fast forward to a few years ago, I owned our old house and had children of my own. Now, to preface this next story, I should mention that our house is set overlooking the town cemetery. One evening after returning home, I'm carrying my youngest son into the house. I thought he was asleep when all of a sudden he starts wailing and screaming while pointing across the graveyard. "Daddy, get inside, they're coming after us. They're going to take us. The green skeleton men are going to take us." So this freaks me out a bit, and I turn to try and see if there's anything he's actually seeing. I don't see anything, but he continues losing it. Once inside, he's still hysterical and wants me to lock the door and shut the shades. He absolutely refused to let me go out and get the groceries. It was bizarre, to say the least. Later that week, he has another spell. It's about 2 in the morning when I hear him crying and yelling for me. I rush into his room, and he's crying, begging me not to let them take me again. I kind of wrote this off as a nightmare, but I ask him where they are trying to take him, and he replies, "Where the bad Power Rangers are." I proceed to ask him where the bad Power Rangers are, and he replies, "A spaceship." Now I don't know if it was just the imagination of a 4-year-old or if it was his mind trying to rationalize an actual traumatizing event. But I can't help but assume the two are connected. And it's the worst feeling in the world trying to protect your child from a monster that you don't even know may exist. Fast forward again to this week. I started a paranormal/conspiracy podcast earlier this year where we talk about creepy stuff and have listener call-ins and experiences and such. Well, I got this email this week from the son of our neighbor who saw the light over our house that night. The incident involving AJ and I went like this. I know it was the early 90s because I was in my 1970 Chevelle. Somewhere between St. Mary's Church and where our shop is now, I was driving us home around 9 at night, no other traffic anywhere. Shortly before the highway curves left, the most intense bright white light appeared out of nowhere. It was like a flashlight being held against my eyes. Oddly enough, as blinding as it was, I could make out the outline of what I assumed was a man about my height. The first instinct was to jam on the brakes. As soon as I did, the light was gone. The car had died, and all lights inside and outside were not functioning. After a few seconds, the lights came on and the car started again. When I asked AJ what we hit, he didn't even respond. There was no damage, and I couldn't find anything. I drove to Mom and Dad's, and AJ begged me not to get out of the car. He never mentioned it on the highway but now insisted I stay in the car. I went in and got Mom and told her everything. She went to talk to AJ, and he told the same story but refused to exit the car. He told her whatever we saw was still hiding under the car somewhere. My wife's question was, did this happen around the same time as the lights at your mom's house? His incident took place no more than a mile or so from our house. Possibly the same or similar time as the lights over the house incident. So I can't help but think they're all related and wonder what about our small town has piqued something's interest so much. Thanks for listening. Okay, so I've talked to many people about this, and many people have had similar experiences. When they were children, they felt like this world was more like a playground. My first memory regarding this was at 8 when I was with my friend who was also 8 and we were returning from school. While talking about random kid stuff in front of my home, we started talking about something bizarre. We started imagining that the world was like a game, like we didn't belong here actually, and that we are just characters inside of that game being controlled by some kind of alien race. This thing has always stuck with me for some reason. I've had other thoughts about that world, not just thoughts but very vivid daydreams about a world that is falling apart and that same alien species. In order to extend their time, they would just use their technology to recreate their existence in other universes, simulating them pretty much. In a way that the game Soma does it, with their ARK project, and these thoughts were quite before Soma and games of that scope, the PS1 era of gaming back then. Now also one of the stories from that same friend, he spoke about encountering weird anomalies when approaching TVs when he was little, pretty much at age 8 to 10, he would sometimes feel the pulse of the TV, and once it hit him so hard that he fell over and was dazed and confused. I don't know. Like once I remember he said that he could feel the surge of electricity. Another friend, when she was little, imagined that she wasn't inside of her body and that everyone around her and her were the tall people and not really people. Also, I know kids have a strong imagination but not that well-defined sense of death and the concept of something abstract like death. Some would say what I felt was because my brain was scared of death, so it made up these crazy stories, but I was an 8-year-old back then, and I didn't think about dying. It's weird. And also, when you look at the quantum level of this universe, things start getting really freaky. So freaky that during my quantum physics classes in university, the professor would talk about how many quantum physicists would have formed a cult around it if there were no other physicists that are in different fields to wake them up from that idea. I mean, there are particles that appear and disappear, change states, and go through matter. They go through us but never interact with it, including us. I always imagined said particles to be the way that the Matrix scans everything this way, using these very small and weird particles. Weird world. Am I crazy? Have you experienced similar things as children? I've tried telling this story to my friends and family, but I'm not sure if they truly believe me or fully understand, as I tend to describe things better in writing than in person. I thought this was a good place to put my story. And maybe someone else can say they saw something similar, because I'm not sure what this was as I've never heard of any other witnesses like it. I was up north, in Shepherd, Michigan. I believe that's the name. It's a very small town, and this was about 3 summers ago. I was visiting my best friend. We were really bored because her mom grounded her from her car, and there's not really anything going on out there, so we decided to walk to downtown. I think it was about 8 or 9 p.m., as the sun was going down. The walk there was pretty long. We had to cross some dirt roads and follow a railroad track. By the time we got there, it was dark. And I already wanted to go home because I don't like being outside in the country in the dark. It's just creepy, man, but we sat at a park for a little bit on the swings. I noticed 2 Sharif police cars parked off at the end of the tiny strip they call downtown, parked at this old car shop. According to my friend, They were most likely looking for two guys who had been car hopping a few nights before. We decided to start heading back because we weren't even supposed to have left the house, and her mom was threatening to lock us out for the night. And it was like 10 p.m. at this point, and I wasn't looking forward to the long walk through the cornfields and railroad tracks in the pitch black night. So we're walking past the old car place, about to turn the corner, and I hear a loud helicopter. Apparently to my friend, it's a police helicopter looking for the car hoppers. As a city girl, I highly doubted that and thought it ridiculous. But I also grew even more paranoid, hoping they wouldn't mistake us for the criminals. We're passing the Sharif car, and I'm trying to act so unsuspicious even though we didn't do anything wrong. Except walk railroad tracks, I guess. Anyways, here's where things get crazy. This is by far the most bizarre thing that has ever happened to me. We turn the corner, and behind this downtown strip is a large grassy field, and at the far end is a forest. At the edge where the field meets the forest, was this giant rod-like thing just suspending mid-air, not much higher than the trees. It's kind of hard to describe, but it was like two rods on top of each other. The top one extended a little more to the right and the bottom one to the left. At each end had very vibrant green lights. So too on each end, on top and bottom. Maybe it was just because of how dark it was, being in the country, but these lights didn't shine like normal to me. The color was very vibrant and warm and glowed more than shined. And it was giant, like the size of a bus or two. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. We heard a helicopter, pretty loud actually, but I didn't see it anywhere. Just this thing hanging mid-air. My friend, not a UFO or alien believer, thinks it's some police aircraft looking for the car hoppers. Which was very hard for me to believe at this point because if this was any kind of aircraft of ours, it would be locked up in Area 51. Not out looking for car hoppers of a tiny little town. It didn't look like a plane. It was a rod. It had no wings or propellers. It made no sense how this giant, heavy-looking rod thing could just sit like that mid-air. It was at a weird slant too. I already had my phone out as a flashlight, and I held my phone up to get a picture of it. That's when this thing went spiraling towards us. Yeah, it literally spun like a fan directly at us, and you could hear the wind cutting against. I just froze, and my face was twisted in the most ugliest way. I was just so stunned and not understanding what was happening. My friend pushed my hands down so my phone was no longer pointing at the thing. And as quickly as it had started spinning toward us, it stopped. It repositioned itself, raised up a little, and started moving the opposite way to cross over downtown. And the helicopter we heard had finally appeared and was in front of the rod thing, as if guiding it away. It wasn't a regular looking helicopter either. Or maybe it was just my hysteria or shock that made it look distorted. But it looked much rounder, the windows were bigger, and all the lights were on inside, but I couldn't see anyone inside. And this is all right above our ducking heads. Excuse my language, but you don't understand how unnerving this felt. My friend might have been in denial, but I knew that wasn't from this world. And I could see the ship more clearly, and it had these intricate lines and designs on it, like wires. I don't remember it as clearly now, and it was very dark, but that stood out to me. And the feeling of seeing something, of having something above you that isn't from us, is a crazy feeling. Your brain is used to having a name for everything we see. Once it can't recognize something as something from humans, it's just a very strange, overwhelming feeling. Possibly a feeling that itself can't be registered or named yet. But yeah. We just slowly walked away, and I kept glancing back a few times, but I quickly stopped and just tried to get home as swiftly as possible. I always wanted to get up close and personal to a life elsewhere, which is just so fascinating to me. I always wanted to see what they really look like. But after that, I'm terrified and will never chase down or even take a picture of a UFO if I ever see one that close again. Of course I don't have the picture anymore either because it got lost when my phone got water damaged that same summer. I've seen a lot, but that's hands down the scariest thing to ever happen to me, and I'd love to know if anyone else has seen something like that before. I've heard of the triangles, bells, saucers, cigars, and stuff. But never of what I saw. If it was a secret military ship of some kind and they wanted to test it in a discreet area, why would they choose to test it right next to the only populated place in the town? Either way, there was definitely something more going on there than some car hoppers. Bizarre customer. So this happened about a month ago. I thought I'd share it here. I work at a local mom and pop shop toy store. It's in a pretty nice small town, and I've loved working down here for the past year. However, every once in a while we get some pretty bizarre people come in. This is the most bizarre person I've ever had to deal with here. It was in the afternoon, and I was in the back room dealing with inventory. I saw out of the corner of my eye a man, maybe mid-40s, come in with his daughter, who looked possibly in his 10 or so. The store was empty besides them, me, and my coworker, so it was simple to hear and keep track of what they were doing subconsciously. I had come up to the register to drop some stock off, and so had the dad and daughter. The daughter had picked out a big stuffed tiger, which was around $80. She set it on the counter, and we told them how much they owed. The dad looked at her in surprise and said, "Wow. I don't think you have that much money saved up yet." The majority of kids in this store pay with their own allowance. There was a moment of silence, then he continued, "Well, why don't we go outside and you can do your thing? And then we'll come back and see about this?" We let them go and just held the toy at the desk until they came back. My biggest regret was not following them out to see what they were doing. Of course, prior to the following occurrences, I really had no solid reason for suspicion, but something did feel really off. I go back into the back room, and after no more than 5 minutes I hear the front door open. I peek out, it's them again. Curious, I followed them back up to the register. And this smell just slapped me in the face. It was so distinct and intense, I almost asked my coworker if she had opened some box or something to cause the smell. It wasn't a natural smell, it was very chemical-like. Like the smell of a penny, but burnt, bleach-like, and plastic-y. And most of all, just so intense, I was almost gagging. The father then paid for the toy tiger with his debit card, and they booked it. I then asked my coworker what the smell was, and as I suspected, it was them. The smell came and went right along with them. So I thought, maybe it was some kind of drug, but I've never ever smelt that smell before, and I've been around lots of drugs. Especially never that strong. And they weren't acting abnormal or high or anything, definitely nothing notable. And then what did they go out and do that would suffice him paying for his daughter's expensive toy? What the hell did "do your thing" mean? My coworker and I assumed it was a sexual thing, considering the amount of time they were gone and the context of the situation, but that doesn't explain the smell. So what the hell happened? What was the smell, and what did "do your thing" mean? Nobody's been able to come up with a theory to explain all of it yet, and I haven't seen the guy since. Any theories? Our winter trip to the cabin. Me and 4 other friends have been working hard at our small community college, and we wanted something to do over winter break. We end up finding a lovely little cabin on a lake up near Orient, Maine. And after much fuss from our parents, we put our money down and started getting ready for the road trip. Keep in mind, this was before the shift from MapQuest to the common use of GPS, TomToms, etc., and before my cell phone was attached to my hip. We found directions on MapQuest and set off on our first taste of freedom in a while. We packed into my friend's small, red Acura and drove the 8+ hours from CT after our last college course around 2 p.m. Looking back on this, it was a horrid idea to pack 5 kids into a small car in the middle of winter and drive in the northern states. It was cold and dreary the whole ride up. That wet and cold that sticks to you. The driver, we will call him Jay, was in love with his Acura. He had very strict rules for driving, gassing it up and stopping, so we settled into the car for a long stretch of driving and blasted some music to pass the time. Further north, we got the weather the roads became. I became very nervous about icing. The further you get up into mid-Maine, the further the distances between exits, no lights, just the moon and stars. Looming pine forests line the 2-lane highway, and it's a sparsely populated area, tiny little towns, miles off of the highway, pepper the landscape. Because of this, we agreed to make one long/food stop only for dinner, delicious Taco Bell, before heading into more desolate areas. During dinner, I made the rookie mistake of getting a giant Sprite, but I made sure to use the bathroom before we left, and we continued on into the night. Infrequently, I spotted glimmers of lights from little homes and towns passing from the passenger seat, and after a couple hours, there came a point I really had to pee. When I mention it, it's usually at the last minute. It was an imminent nuclear-level disaster if we didn't stop soon. But there were no signs for a gas station on any of the last 10 exits for the past 40 minutes, and I was ready to pull over on the side of the road. It was beyond painful, but my friend driving was paranoid and refused. He said, "Something didn't feel right / it doesn't feel safe to stop." Now, I'm usually very good with sensing strangeness, but I was so distracted by my body mechanics that I didn't give a shit. I pressed my eyes shut, drummed my hands and fingers, started singing with the music, and pleading to whatever could hear me, anything to help distract me. As if the universe heard my plea and I manifested it myself, the next exit had a small sign for a locally owned gas station. Perfect. After a little protest, I let Jay know his car would soon be baptized in my urine, and we pulled off and drove another 10 damned minutes until we pulled up at this tiny, I'm talking 500 square feet max, dimly lit, and decrepit gas station. Nothing surrounded us for miles. There was a large paved area that surrounded this small building, seemingly to make it easier for larger trucks with small trailers to pull around the back. A dumpster sat in the back left, by the trees. No lights in the parking lot. Just light from the sliver of the waxing moon. Inside the shop were 2 green fluorescent lights, but they barely reached the 2 old pumps outside. It seemed like the darkness was encroaching on the sickly-looking gas station, ready to swallow it. The moonlight didn't seem to touch it. The creepy feeling we had all started to talk about was growing stronger. We chalked it up to unfamiliar territory and the fact that it was dead of winter in the middle of the night. I teleported out of the passenger seat and inside, barely getting out the word bathroom. When the tired, middle-aged attendant slowly reached for the keys and tossed them to me, not saying a word, crooking his hand and pointing to the outside corner of the small building. I ventured into the darkness, reaching the rear of the structure. My stomach got that quick anxiety pang. I strongly remember having such an uneasy feeling about going back there. As I ran back out the door, I demanded everyone come back and stand outside to wait for me. For safety and company. My boyfriend obliged, and the others understandably stayed in the car. I rounded the corner, and I did a brief double take as I saw someone standing by the dumpster. Just a dark figure. The moonlight reflected off their dark, short hair and what looked to be a fur-lined coat. The urge to pee was too strong for me to care about it in the moment. And I felt reassured hearing my boyfriend's footsteps behind me. I struggled to unlock the door, and as I made it inside, I fumbled for a switch. Much to my delight, I discovered there was no lighting as I started to relieve myself. Fantastic. I called through the beat-up metal door for something, anything to light up this closet of a bathroom. I had left my phone in the car cup holder. I hear a small shuffling sound, and my imagination was running wild. Bugs crawling around the walls, bumping into spent toilet paper. A person standing in the corner. My boyfriend at the time thankfully had a flashlight. He was in the military and always came prepared. I didn't lock it, so he poked it through the crack in the door. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness at this point. I remember seeing the treetops, the starry night in all its beauty, and some dark mass by the dumpster again, through the crack, before clicking on the light, which blinded me. My sixth sense, for lack of a better term, was starting to become more prevalent now that I started to get physical relief. I kept telling myself, it's just an unfamiliar area in the dead of night. I felt overall unwelcome and felt the need to rush. I remember that unpleasant feeling vividly. I recall my boyfriend having asked if I was almost done. To which I replied, I was not even close. I heard some talking getting closer. Sam, the other girl on the trip, made a comment along the lines of "You see that? / who would be outside at this hour / in the cold?" And I hear her boyfriend say something like, "It's 10 degrees outside, there's no way." Another strange voice came through the door. It was the gas station attendant coming with them. I learned later that Sam had decided to go pee too since we were stopping, and she saw the figure as well. She went inside to tell the attendant about someone outside, and she mentioned he didn't respond but came out from behind the counter. As I was finishing buttoning up my jeans, feeling a million times better, I heard a breath in my ear. As corny as it sounds. It just went ha. Even though I had this deep pit of fear / unease growing in my gut ever since we arrived, in the moment, I convinced myself it was just me shuffling around on this dirty-ass tile. Though I know I didn't move my feet. Dirt crunching softly does not sound like a human breath. Even as I type this, my whole body is chilling up. I immediately raised the flashlight up to the mirror that was fogged with age and soap scum. No one was behind me. I was ready to hit the road and get the duck out of here. I flung the door open and booked it through my boyfriend, Sam and her boyfriend, and the attendant, who was standing a bit hunched near them. Odd. I scanned the empty pavement. There seemed to be this lingering darkness hanging around the forest line where it met the parking lot. I turned to the dumpster, and no one was there. It should have been reassuring, but it ended up freaking me out even more. "I think we should go." "Sam, do you really have to pee?" I asked. I remember she looked uncomfortable. They all did. It was like the attendant was trying to block us from rounding the corner to get to the front of the store. Or keep us in the area so something could sneak up on us and attack us. I got that threatening feeling. In hindsight, maybe he was trying to make sure we didn't trash anything? I heard Jay start up the Acura and give the attendant a wide berth. He wasn't saying anything. Wasn't looking at us. I swear the darkness that seemed to be devouring the light from the shop earlier was emanating off of or around him. You know when you can just tell somebody who has bad intentions? Everything screamed in me, it was time to go. Sam, and everyone, picked up on the hint and rushed to the pumps, piling into the car as fast as we could, and pulling out. We laughed about it once we were 20 minutes away, down one of the main freeways. We made it to the cabin and enjoyed our first night there. The second part of this story was the next day. We had brought some snacks and cereal, but after ducking around, enjoying the frozen lake, and watching movies all day, we quickly realized we needed more sustenance and had asked one of the neighboring cabins if there was a town around where we could get supplies/food. The neighbor told us about a Walmart or some place up Route 1 to Holton. The populated town was almost an hour away. The neighbor said to just drive straight for about 45 minutes, and you will be downtown before you know it. It was later in the evening, the sun had gone down, and we all piled into Jay's Acura again, me in the front seat, my boyfriend right behind me, Sam and her boyfriend next to him. Jay was super nervous to drive. Temperatures had gone from single digits to negatives. The wet had turned to ice in some areas. But we made the slow and steady trip up to Holton, got our supplies, and made our way back to the cabin. Halfway there, rounding one of the bends, he saw a person on the road, no distinguishing features, according to him. Jay had started to panic, yet slowed down and turned the car to avoid them, but ended up hitting a patch of black ice. Next thing we know, we are spinning out of control slowly, off the road. I remember putting my foot up on the dash and my hand up on the ceiling as we hit a telephone pole with my passenger door. We descended into the snow-covered ditch, mostly unharmed. Discovering later, as we were towed by good Samaritans, that we were 10 feet from landing in a river. Jay mentioned why he started swerving, to which he was told there was absolutely no one on the road. We were incredibly lucky, and we weren't the only car to slide off the road in the last 24 hours. There was a tan Mazda van about 30 feet to the left of us that had also shared a similar fate the night before. They, however, had landed in the water, but they still survived. Poor Jay was beside himself with heartbreak due to his poor car and the damages. Thankfully, there was a body shop up in Holton that could help. He swears, based on what we were telling him on the car ride up the night before, that something had followed us, or attached to us. He was adamant it must have been the person from the gas station, but we didn't see what he saw. Maybe the attendant cursed us. Maybe it was just unfortunate luck. But we were grateful nothing more came of it. We ended up doing a little seance/prayer that night to try and detach whatever energy seemed to follow us, and had no issues during the remainder of the trip. We aren't friends anymore, but I do have a female attachment that I have had a couple brushes with in the past, and most recently, last year. If you made it this far, thank you for taking the time to listen to one of my many strange experiences over the years. A few years ago, I was camping with some friends in East Tennessee. This is a less known campsite that is not very well marked. There is a road crossing a creek, and on the right side there is a single campsite, where we were, and on the left side, there is a string of maybe 4 campsites following down the creek. The road is on higher ground, so you have to make your way down a hill on either side. About 1:30 a.m., 2 big pickup trucks pull up and set up at the first campsite across the road. We all thought it was really strange that people would be getting there so late. After some time at unloading, they got a huge fire burning and had very bright lights that lit up their whole area. They also had something like a small, tall stand-up tent. Like some type of pop-up changing/private room. That was it. This is where it started to get weird, and my memory is not completely reliable because alcohol was involved. It looked to me like they had some type of weird outfit on, like robes, jackets, or some other clothing of importance. Maybe purple or dark blue in color? And they kept going in and out of the tent while the others were moving about and around the fire. It was so bizarre to us that we couldn't help peering over at them every so often to see what they're doing. Whatever it was, it seemed ritualistic. Not saying it was a crazy cult or anything, but that's what we thought at the time. None of it made sense to us. They would have known there were other people around because of the cars, so secrecy obviously wasn't a concern of theirs. Whatever they're doing, it wasn't a typical relaxing by a campfire and making s'mores kind of camping. They were doing something, and they were there all night doing it. I saw them leave early in the morning but didn't notice anything crazy. I do remember they had several trash bags in the back of their truck. My only normal explanation is that maybe they're doing some type of volunteer trash cleanup, team building/hazing, or some type of biological study. Has anyone ever witnessed something like this, or have any ideas what this could have been? My girlfriend's first experience with a possible mimic. So let me just say straight away that I'm a firm believer in the supernatural. From a young age, I've had experiences with it, and it's become a casual thing to me. I'm fully aware of hoaxes and people just wanting views and attention on the internet, but I do believe there is truth in some of what's out there. My girlfriend, not so much. She's never really interacted with or had experience with anything supernatural, and things she says she has experienced as a child, she's shaken off as a child's imagination. The following experience that happened less than 24 hours ago as of writing this made her question all of this. To set the scene, we were hanging out with a good friend of ours who we both love dearly. It was about 3 a.m. when she asked us to walk her home. Being that she lived about 30-ish minutes away, we were more than happy to help her feel safe and escort her home. During the walk, me and my girlfriend had our first dispute about the relationship. It was something petty, but being as it was our first one, we both got rather riled up and raised our voices at each other. We got our friend home, and a few minutes after dropping her off, we hugged it out and admitted we were both in the wrong and moved on. That being said, we were still a little at odds, but only because it was the first time we'd ever conflicted in such a way. This is where it gets interesting. Partway through the walk back, I'd offered that if my girlfriend wasn't comfortable, I would stay at my place tonight rather than back to her dad's like we had originally planned. Following this, we began approaching this long and tall hedge, with the other side of this leading out into fields and forestry areas. When we got close, I heard something on the other side of the hedge, rustling, twigs snapping, leaves being pushed aside. I thought nothing of it. I just assumed it was another person because our town is known for its drunken cats that lurk in the dark hours of the morning. We both stopped in front of the hedge as my girlfriend wanted to roll a cigarette, stressed from the argument. I stand in front of her, and in the split moment that I had my back to her, there was suddenly a jet black and beautiful cat behind her. Disclaimer: I love black cats. I don't agree with the stigma around them and that they're bad luck. My girlfriend also loves cats. She doesn't shut up about them. A new meme during the day? Cat meme. Interesting video online? Cat video. She lives and breathes for them. My girlfriend then proceeded to see the cat and swing around. She was happy to see a lovely black cat for her to pet. In the moment she moved, I had the most sickening feeling in my chest. The hairs all across my body stood on end, almost as if my fight or flight instinct went into overdrive. Something wasn't right. I immediately tell my girlfriend to stop. She looks at me in confusion as she gets closer to it, but I tell her again to stop and walk towards me. She was confused but listened to me. She got close, and I immediately began walking with her home, checking over my shoulder and looking at this cat. It had followed her about a foot as she left but then almost immediately reset, moving back to the exact same place on the pavements in the exact same position. I know there's nothing abnormal about this, right? So far it was just some rustling, a black cat, and a bad feeling. What followed solidified that I made the right choice. As we moved away, there was suddenly a blood-curdling, distorted, and seemingly painful hiss from behind the hedge. I have no way to fully explain to you all just how awful this noise was and how I could feel it shift through my bones as this deformed and disfigured hiss moved through the air. I quickened my pace and pulled my girlfriend with me. On the way back, I explained why I did it, stating about the supernatural, and despite knowing her view on it all, she needed to trust me on this. She was skeptical but trusted me enough to hear me out. We get back to her dad's and sit down, having a cigarette and discussing in comfort what had happened. I talk about mimics, goatmen, wendigos, all of it. My girlfriend, who was skeptical at first. She goes pale, and I mean deathly pale. It's then that she tells me about the cat and what it was like when she was close to it. Apparently this cat made no sound, not even that of it breathing, and that the air around it felt freezing cold. She proceeded to talk to me more about the area of town we walked through. I'd lived in that town for a while, but I'd never really ventured out of my comfort zone, sticking to the town center and small surrounding area. She, however, had lived there all her life and had moved around it multiple times, both by herself and with family. Apparently the road we were going down, with the hedge and open areas on the other side, is well known for its disappearances. Most of the missing reports of people and pets in our town are always noted as last seen in or around that area. As well as this, my girlfriend once had a flat near there, and she said that her older neighbors would tell her not to be out after dark as people go missing. Now don't get me wrong, this could all be nothing. If I were hearing this story from someone else, I would be poking holes in their story and stating how it could have been numerous other things, but trust me, this was something else. Maybe it wasn't a mimic, goat man, wendigo, or something, but whatever the hell it was, this thing was not human. We were up until 5:30 a.m. talking about what happened and what she knows about the location, and despite maybe being paranoid, we called our friend, saying how we believe it's best that she gets home before dark from now on. There's a legend from 1907 about a ghost train. I think my friends witnessed it. So this particular incident happened at one of my favorite spots to walk to. The 1907 Levyside train bridge near Eagle Creek. This is kind of a short one, BTW. So I've been there several hundred times by myself and over 100 with my friends. So it was me, Al, B, and T. We went to get drunk and tagged the broken pillar of the bridge at the bottom. The bottom was where the levee was. You can walk in the water from there or swim or fish. Water's dirty, but you can swim or fish nonetheless. So we decided to go up to the tracks, which is about a 32 to 36 foot climb up the dips of the levee. So halfway up, a passenger train blazes by going at least 70 miles per hour. It was brightly lit, and we saw lights as if they were in a passenger train window. The train, however, looked like a blur. We didn't hear it at all. Not a whisper in the wind until the train was blaring by. It was so loud, yet we didn't hear it till we saw it. So we ran to the top, and the train was gone. At least a 5-mile stretch of track. Nothing in sight. People have always said the tracks were haunted. Speaking of a ghost train and specters of the past. However, they say it's haunted because of the accident that involved the broken pillar. There were fatalities. I have a screenshot of the recorded accident over 100 years ago. People have been murdered by that levee. My friend Z also found a knife washed up in 1907, 3 days after 2 women were found dead at the levee. He had very bad luck afterwards. So he threw it back in the water a few days later. I think the train we saw was the train that crashed so long ago. Either way, it disappeared. Not to hear it coming was also bizarre. Strange things occur in 1907. The thing that lives in my closet. To start, I am not an eloquent story writer or best at elaboration. All I want to say is that this is all true. I have been dealing with something that has lived in my closet for as long as I can remember. I am a 20-year-old female currently, but my first real memory of this thing was when I was 3 years old. For some extra detail, my mom graduated high school with 2 kids under her belt. She had my brother at 17 as a junior, and me when she was 18 and a senior. My dad was 1 year her senior and was in college by the time I was born, but he dropped out of school and our lives just as quickly. He's bounced in and out of our lives and left my mom to raise us on her own with the help of her mother. We lived with my grandma when I was between 1 and 2 before my mom decided to jump from apartment to rent to buy houses, with my dad occasionally trailing in behind her before breaking off again. She worked 2 jobs and was going to cosmetology school, and with child support and the help of my grandma, she was able to buy a small house from a nice elderly couple by the time I was 3. I distinctly remember the house when she had gone to view it. I clung to her leg the entire walk through. I remember it being cold even though the fireplace was lit and being terrified of the basement. She tried to get me to go down with her, but I had started crying, so the elderly woman had stayed upstairs with me while my mom looked around downstairs with the elderly man. When we moved in, it felt warmer. With all of our familiar furniture, it wasn't as daunting, and I remember trying to help my mom paint my room even though I could barely hold up a roller. The one thing that still stayed cold and scary was the basement. My brother and I were petrified of it and would play a game of chicken to see who could make it farther down the flight of stairs. Of course, to any child, basements are scary, but there was something about this area that really bothered us. My mom tried her best to make it as homey down there as possible and had made it into a second living room and play area for us. It definitely worked, but my brother and I wouldn't stay down there alone. By the time I was 5, it wasn't as scary, and one day the cold atmosphere of the basement completely dissipated. It was harder for our mom to get us to leave the basement than it had been to get us to go down there in the first place. It was also when I was 5 that I had my first memory of the thing in the closet. Just like in the basement, it happened overnight. My closet suddenly became the scariest place in the house for me. I used to slip into my closet after a nightmare and sleep in there, so when I opened up my closet to do that one night, I remember how terrified I was. The closet usually, when open, would be lit up by my nightlight, but this time it was completely black. I couldn't see my shoe rack or my toy bins inside, it was just a black mass. I couldn't look away or move, I was completely paralyzed and stood stock still in front of the doors. There was a soft chirping sound like the baby rabbits I'd watch run between our yard and the neighbors. I wanted to go in to find the rabbit and thought that it had to be as scared as I was, but after a few seconds I ended up shutting the closet doors to hide under my covers until morning. From there I couldn't sleep unless I had our Jack Russell sugar with me and the closet doors closed. For most nights nothing would happen, and I felt safe with my nightly routine of closing the closet doors and sleeping with sugar under the covers. A few months had passed before the noises started up again. I woke up to see Sugar standing at the foot of my bed with the fur along her spine bristling and growling at my open closet doors. Like the first night I had seen it, the closet was completely black. The chirps started, and with each chirp, it'd get a snappy bark from Sugar. I remember instead of being scared, I had gotten angry and started yelling at my closet. Telling it that if it didn't stop, I'd have Sugar tear it apart. The chirping stopped, Sugar laid back down, and I went back to sleep. This continued for months. The sounds would come up in the middle of the night, but they would change periodically. The rabbit chirps to hog noises, to an amalgamation of sounds I didn't understand half the time. The rabbit and hog noises are the most memorable. and every time I'd threaten it with the declaration of sugar attacking it, the noises would quiet down. My mom and brother never believed me. My brother thought I was being a scared little girl, and my mom believed it was my vivid imagination. Every time they'd tell me that nothing was there, I'd get frustrated and, by default, get more and more agitated at night with the thing in my closet. When I was 6, my mom started seeing a guy who I'll call R. He was an awful man, and despite having 2 kids of his own, he was terrible with children. He'd scream at us and beat us whenever we were out of place. R's nightly visits to me became more terrifying than the nightly visits from the thing. The first time I had physically seen the thing was when R'd come home drunk. It hadn't been too late in the night, but we had all been asleep by the time he rolled in. I still remember his footsteps down the hallway. Too quiet for a drunk man, and I knew he would be coming to my room for another one of his visits. I jumped out of my bed, opened the closet doors, and slipped right in. It was cold, and the feeling of not being alone is something I can't shake today. I heard her open my bedroom door and walk in. Sugar ran from the room after a quick smack, and all I could hear was R's heavy breathing as he pulled the covers off of my bed. After a few seconds, my bedroom light was turned on, and the closet was lit up from the gap under the doors. I looked sideways when I saw long black hands planted on the floor beside mine. A lanky black figure sat beside me, hunched over and staring through the gap between the 2 closet doors. It's hard to describe how it looked. It wasn't quite humanoid, but it definitely wasn't the great black beast that I had imagined it to be. It was gangly and creepy looking with big, white, hollowed eyes. No nose or mouth I could see from its shadowed body, just tall with long arms and legs, tucked down beside me. It never looked at me. Its head followed every movement of R until he eventually turned the lights off and left my room. I was frozen in place and felt like crying but couldn't. When I couldn't hear R's footsteps anymore, the closet doors opened, and I felt my legs walking me to bed and was suddenly asleep. After that, I didn't see it for years. My mom broke it off with R, and it was the 3 of us again. I still kept my closet doors shut at night, but I didn't need a nightlight or my dog to protect me anymore. I still felt eyes on me now and again while walking down the hallway or while I did laundry in the basement, but for the most part no noises and no sightings from the thing. When I turned 12, my mom and dad took me and my brother to Disneyland as a birthday gift. My body wasn't used to the more or less bad air quality of California, and by the time we were back in Washington, I was in unbearable pain. By the time my mom brought me to the hospital, my appendix had burst, and I was taken in for emergency surgery. For a week I was in and out of consciousness, but for the most part I was doing well. I was home and in bed rest, and honestly, all I recall is being glad that I got to stay out of school longer. It was 2 weeks in that I saw the thing again. I woke up in a cold sweat and saw that my closet doors were open. I stared into the closet for a few minutes before I turned my head to the other side of my bed and saw the tall shadow thing standing beside me. I wasn't scared to see it, the painkillers in my system and being drowsy from just waking up prevented that, but I had been startled by its sudden appearance. I couldn't move, so I just stared back at it. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it had been long enough for me to get tired again, and I was starting to fall in and out of sleep. I felt a hand press down on my forehead and start smoothing down my hair. The hand was cold, and it felt good against my feverish skin. After a few seconds of petting, I was out for the rest of the night and the majority of the following day. After I got better and returned to school, I saw it more often again. It didn't make the strange noises anymore, but I'd often wake up to see it staring at me from any area of my room. It felt like standing in that night. Usually it was on either side of my bed, sitting in the corner, or huddled in the open closet. It didn't ever do more than stare at me, and even though its appearance still scared the living daylights out of me, I wasn't against it being there. Usually once my heart calmed down from waking up and seeing it stare at me, I'd fall back asleep, and it'd be gone by the morning. Years passed and its hobby of staring at me stopped, and eventually I didn't see it anymore. I figured that it had been a childhood imagination and that it was my mind's way of dealing with my trauma somehow. When I graduated high school, I moved to my first apartment with my brother. I was 18 and excited to have a place of our own. My brother was a year into college already, and I was preparing to start my first year. The first night that we slept in our apartment was the night that I saw the thing again. My bedroom had a walk-in closet and was to the direct left of my bed. Always in sight. I had just started to fall asleep when the closet door had opened. It terrified me, and my first thought was that someone had broken in at some point in the day. And when the shadow thing came ducking out of the closet instead, I was paralyzed. I couldn't look away and watched it come and kneel by my bedside. It stared at me before it put its head on the bed and closed its eyes. Next thing I know, it's morning, and it's no longer there. My closet door is shut, and I can move again. For the next week I had been extremely on edge and slept in the living room. I didn't know how to react to seeing it again. I thought it had been something made up from when I was a kid, and seeing it again deeply bothered me. Though I eventually returned to sleeping in my room, and again I woke up to the closet opening and it coming to kneel by my bed. It varied in what it did. Most of the time it'd stare, but sometimes it would lay its head on my bed beside my head, close its eyes, or pet my hair. Sometimes it would walk around my room and look at the stuff on my dresser. My cat never reacted negatively to it. He'd sleep by the head of my bed too, and whenever the closet door would open, he'd just move down to the foot of my bed and watch the thing move around my room. Even when my brother and I changed rooms for unrelated reasons, it would still come out of my closet to do whatever it felt like doing that night. It didn't come every night, but most nights I'd wake up to it there. After a year and a half living in that apartment, we moved to a smaller one a few roads down. It followed me there too, and I would wake up to it, opening my closet now and again to move around my room. By this time we had gotten our first dog. A puppy when we first moved into the new place. Just like my cat, he had little reaction to the thing other than barking a few times when it would first exit the closet at night and following it around. The thing never had explicit interest in either of my animals but liked to watch the fish in my fish tank most nights. Now presently, my brother and I live in a renovated home, and we've only been here for less than a month now. I have a small room, and the thing still comes out of my closet some nights, but now it likes to leave my room to go about the rest of our home. My room is too small with too few items for it to really be interested in anything. My dog doesn't follow it around like he did as a puppy. He knows that the thing isn't going to play with him. My cat still likes to watch it, but usually gets bored and goes back to sleep too. Sometimes I like to follow it out into the living room and watch what it does, and some nights I go right back to sleep. It doesn't scare me anymore. It's never done anything negative or tried to scare me. I don't come home to open cabinets or trashed furniture. It's more of a looker than a doer, if anything. Other than a cup that's moved from the coffee table to the counter, it doesn't mess around with much. I've tried talking about it to friends and my brother, but they've never seen it. My brother doesn't care if it's real or not as long as it stays out of his room. The same is with my friends, as long as they don't have to see it, they are more than happy to hang out at my place at night. I'm not really searching for much on here other than simply wanting to share my experience. I know this is probably hard to listen, and like I said, I'm not exactly the best at writing. I guess the most I'm looking for is if someone else has the same experience. If anyone else has had something following them since they were kids. Or if they've got any idea on what this thing could be or why it likes hanging around so much. Anyways, if you're listening to this, thanks for sticking around to finish. Seeing some strange light in the sky flying around, which suddenly went from far away to very close. It shines a beam of light on my friend, and he screams and runs inside his house, which was kind of out in the country. I stay there and keep looking at it. The light goes off, and the object is very far away than it was originally. I immediately feel a wave of heat at my feet going up my body, so much so that I could feel beads of sweat coming out of my skin as it slowly went up my body. I felt sick. I run inside the house and can hear my friend talking to our friends about what we saw in the kitchen, and they were laughing at him in disbelief. They didn't see me come inside. I went down the hallway with bedrooms on each side and basement steps and a bathroom halfway down the hall. I was about to puke. At the end of the hall, the wall was mirrored. When I looked at my reflection, my entire body was waving like a frequency wave would, and I could see through myself. Then I'm somewhere else. I'm on my back. I've got sleep paralysis or something. I couldn't get up. There's a haze all around where I can see, and it's almost like the source of light is coming from this haze. Then 4 gray aliens come into my view. 2 on each side, 1 in front of the other. Then I could feel my brain being what can only be described as sucked out of my right ear. It felt just like you might imagine, but there was no pain, it just felt like described. It was rather scary. More so than I didn't have a chance to freak out about the 4 grays. Then, before I could totally panic about my brain being sucked out of my ear, the 2 aliens in the back turned into my mom and dad. Literally in less than a second with zero chance to think about what I'm seeing, I knew without a doubt, it just appeared in my mind immediately. That's just what they do to keep people calm while this is being done. And before I could give that any thought at all, it felt like my brain was now being stretched like a rubber band, and something was trying to pull it out, but it was attached inside my head. I could hear the sound it made, like a band would make when stretched. It made me want to grit my teeth like nails on a chalkboard. Then whatever had it let go, and it rushed so fast back into my head through my ear and felt very weird as it rushed back in. Then boom, I'm back in this reality. I was confused but no longer has paralysis and could sit up. I didn't know where I was. Then I saw a painting of a horse on the wall and knew I was in my friend's bedroom, which I'd never been in before and was off limits. They were out of town. They owned horses. I realized I had no clothes on and looked around to see where my clothes were. They were folded up extremely neat, perfectly stacked beside me. I assure you, I would not have ever done that. I started feeling the heat move up my body again and suddenly needed to vomit. I ran out of the bedroom, which was the last door on the right in the hallway, went left to the bathroom, which I was originally trying to get to, but somehow decided to pass it and ended up in the bedroom. I made it to the toilet and puked. Then I walked into the kitchen freaked out and still undressed. My friends turned and saw me and started laughing at me standing there naked. But they quickly realized something was wrong. I told them something weird just happened. The friend who was outside and whose house it was still was freaked out about the beam of light and whatever was flying outside and was shocked I was inside the house. He asked when I came inside. I told him about 45 seconds after he did, just about 10 minutes ago. He said he was worried but was too scared to go look outside for me, and nobody believes him, and they thought we were playing a prank, so he was too scared to go. It really did scare him. I told him again that I came in behind him and he was telling the story to everyone, and nobody noticed me come in just 10 minutes ago. He looked confused, and so did everyone else. He said when? I said 10 minutes ago. He said, dude, you've been missing for way over an hour. And I thought you were outside, but nobody believed me and thought it was a prank. I said there's no way, I had 7 minutes of events happen at most, never once was I asleep or anything. Everyone says yeah, it's been way over an hour. So you've been inside this house the entire time then? Feel free to explain what this was. I've been trying to figure it out for 27 years. I told this story about 10 times after it happened and realized that nobody either believes me or doesn't care that there were 4 beings that look like textbook aliens. So I didn't tell the story for over 20 years. It was not until the last couple years that I started sharing it again with all the alien stuff in the news. FYI, they aren't aliens and didn't come from outer space. Yes, they fly around, they have been here longer than we have and either come and go from another dimension or possibly from inside the earth somehow, possibly both. And if I've maintained your interest until this point, I hope I don't lose you at the final piece of information on them. These beings are angels or demons. In my case, they were demonic. No, I never felt I needed to fear them, but everything was so perfectly executed I didn't have a chance to focus on any one part of the experience long enough. I also never felt like they were trying to make me fear them. They communicate by putting thoughts directly into your mind. That little voice you sometimes might have in your head that somehow gives you insight or info or warns you, and you aren't exactly sure how you knew what you did, but luckily you were right? That's them. This is 100% fact. I'll never forget it and have been careful not to change or add to this experience and the telling of it. I would tell this story to myself at least once a month for over 20 years. Sometimes I would tell it aloud to an empty room, pretending I had an audience that gave a shit. Because, trust me, when you have an event like this happen to you and nobody seems to give a shit and literally says nothing after you tell this story, it is very upsetting in many ways. But I'm over that now. I don't give a shit if anyone cares or believes it or not. But I promise you, they aren't what the media wants you to believe. But feel free to prove me wrong, I'll wait. My family cabin. I have a couple of stories to tell here, all of them involving my family's cabin in Wyoming. So for starters, I need to put this into context. I was born and raised in South Dakota, and if you ever look at a map of it, you'll see that it's a great beige almost rectangle with a singular circle of green right on the west side of the state. That's where I grew up. Now the west side of South Dakota has some pretty amazing sights, and it kind of makes up for there being shit all to do here. But in my opinion, nothing here holds a candle to the cabin. The cabin is exactly what it sounds like, a log cabin with no running water, a well, and a creek adjacent. The only modernity it has is electricity, and that was added in the 1930s. It's an hour away from my hometown, and if you die up there, there is no chance you will ever be found, so it's my favorite place to go. It was great when I was stressed from high school and just needed to get away, and now that I'm 25, it's my favorite place to unwind after a long week. But that being said, it has its quirks. I'm going to start with the most normal of the stories, not normal because this happens all the time, but because there was no paranormal / extraterrestrial / ooga booga stuff. I was 13 at my sister's birthday party. My sister and I always celebrate our birthdays up there. My dad had to leave to take my sister's friends who couldn't sleep over back to their homes. My mom doesn't like to spend the night up there, so she left before the sun went down. This left 13-year-old me with about 5, 10 or 11-year-old girls. In short, I was miserable. I was poking at the fire, planning on dropping some scary stories on them so that they would have nightmares, when I heard a distinct rustling noise coming from the dry creek just ahead of us. I looked up from the fire and saw a figure approaching us. I told my sister to quietly get back to the cabin. She looked at me and was about to definitely say why, when she saw that my eyes were fixed on a singular point. She followed my gaze and not long after saw an old bearded man, wide-eyed, stumbling towards us. She screamed, prompting her friends to scream, and they all ran back to the cabin. The screaming stunned me, as I was sure that this man would now proceed to kill me, and after he was done, march to the cabin to finish off the girls. But that didn't happen. Instead, he stopped and just started mumbling. I could only make out a few words: deers, rope, crick, and razor blades. Eventually, I gathered up the courage to tell him off. I let him know there were guns in the cabin, and if he didn't leave, I would go get one. After I said this, I began backing towards the cabin and eventually retreated inside it. We told my dad when he got back what happened, and he wasted no time gathering up people from the surrounding community. The old guy was caught, but not by police. He was caught by his daughter, who thanked my dad. I wasn't there for that. I guess this guy was just a very old man with dementia who wandered out of his cabin and followed the road to ours, thinking it was one of the cutoffs to the creek. As for the razor blades, well, back in the 70s, a group of rednecks got tired of city people swimming in their creek, so on one of the rope swings they attached razor blades. A bunch of kids cut their hands up. The rednecks were never caught, and all they managed to do was get every rope swing along the creek cut down. Ultimately, I feel more sad than scared when I remember this. However, this is only the first story I have from up there. The next one happened when I was 19. My first long-term relationship had just ended, and to say I was taking it hard would be an understatement. Fortunately, my childhood friend, who I'll call Josh, was coming back to South Dakota from basic training. This was also around my birthday, so I had already gotten some days off of work. There ended up being a ton of people going up there, so many in fact that there was no room for me to sleep inside the cabin. That wasn't an issue for me though, as at the time I drove a Subaru hatchback and I had no qualms about sleeping in my car. I had a whole system. I blew up an air mattress, put down my back seats, slid it in, and I was off. The air mattress took up the entirety of my back seat and trunk, leaving no room for me to put my clothes while I slept. So I grabbed some hangers from the cabin, and when it was time to go to bed, I hung my clothes up on the inside handle of my trunk door. I kept the door open because I like the night air while I sleep. The weight and warmth of the blankets, mixing with the general feeling of chill that came with the mountain night air, was and still is very relaxing. I was even happier when it started to rain. However, that night I woke up with a strange feeling just kind of looming around me. I sat up and got a little disappointed at how deflated the air mattress had gotten before I started to hear the soft squishing noises of bare feet in mud and grass. I looked out the windows to see who was coming to scare me. I was naturally irritated and called out, saying something to the effect of "Duck you, I hear you," but no one made their presence known. I bit the bullet and threw the covers off of me, hopping out of the car into the pouring rain. I looked around my car and didn't see anyone. I was confused and a little scared but decided it was a good idea to just go back to sleep. As I wrapped myself back up, I began drifting off to the sound of raindrops tapping the roof of my car, and then, as I was about to go to sleep, there was a loud thump that ripped me awake and sent me flying back up. It sounded as though someone had just slapped the back window of my car, and thus I didn't sleep that night. When the sun started to come up, I donned my clothes, which were somehow still dry, and began to search the surroundings. Sure enough, there were footprints around my car and a single handprint on the back window. I thought about letting the group know but decided against it as they probably wouldn't believe me even if I showed them the evidence, but also because I didn't want to ruin the weekend. The only one I tell is Josh, who also said it was a good idea not to tell anyone. He's a very spiritual person and believed then, as he does now, that it was some kind of ghost. I have a few others, but this is already way too long, so I'll just end it on the most recent happening up there. Due to financial irresponsibility that is 100% on me, I now live with my parents again, at the age of 25. As such, I've been helping out where I can, doing the shopping, mowing the lawn, and taking the dogs out. But recently my dad and I have started renovating the cabin at the beginning of the summer. We fixed the road, which had collapsed in the 80s, and we had been driving around for years on end, and fixed up the well so that it actually pumps water now. We finished the well reno yesterday, actually. Some family friends came up after the renovation, and we all had a good time. Beers were had, and the cabin was full of laughter. Around 3 o'clock, I packed up my stuff and left for home. After a few hours, my mom got back from work and told me she was heading up to the cabin with Dad and the family friends. I assumed they'd be gone for a couple of hours at most, but by 9, I figured they were spending the night up there. Mom still doesn't like doing that, but will do so to make Dad happy. But at 11, I heard the heavy front door shut. When I came out of my room, I saw them both quietly walking in, like something bad had happened. I said I thought they were spending the night, and my mom said no very quickly. My dad asked for my help tomorrow. At the time of typing this, it's today, to help him fix up his car, which quit out up there, and then he said, after that, we'll go for a hike and find out what the god-awful noise was. He said it sounded like a horse violently dying, and my mom backed him up. Apparently everyone up there heard it, and the festivities stopped soon after. Unfortunately, I'm busy today, using my free time to type this out, so I can't go up there to help him today. But honestly, after all the stuff that has happened, the two things I wrote about here, a strange sound like a horse violently dying doesn't shock me in the least. I love that cabin, I always will, but there is something in the hills that could very well be dangerous. When night falls there, your best bet is to leave. I'm not really sure what to call this. I am actually telling this for the first time in my life. I never told anyone, but I'm not sure why now. I guess I'm finally getting over my fear of telling and just wanted it out of my chest. To tell you the truth, I'm shaking at the moment as I type this, and what I'm about to tell you will make sense soon as to why I'm scared to speak. It started, well, to make sense of it, my first memory as a child. I was 4. I remember because it was my birthday and I was blowing out the candles on my cake, and it was one of those number candles. Anyway, I blew them out and looked up to my family. As a child, they were a little blurry, as I don't fully remember their faces. Anyway, at the corner to my right, there was this dark spot that no one seemed to notice, and in the middle of that corner stood a girl or woman, I'm not sure, but she stood there watching, smiling, and waving. I didn't react but stare until my family pulled my attention, but even so, I still saw her there at the corner of my eye, watching me. Here's the thing about her. She was in every way beautiful, to say the least. I didn't really see her face, but I caught glances of it. She had this white long-sleeved dress that reached the floor, but the bottom had a black like fire design to it. It was more like shadows. She was pale, and the shadows that surrounded her made her even more pale. But the paleness wasn't like any skin color you would think. It was paper-like color, or to make more sense, picture a person who has a paper skin, the blank paper that you use to print. Anyway, she had long hair, an ebony color. From what I see at times, her eyes were pale blue, but there was a hollowness to them like staring at a pit of emptiness that is devoid of colors. They were always covered with her hair. But the thing that stands out about her is her smile. Pearly straight teeth are smiling at me. Always. Her ruby lips made it even more terrifying. Her smile is large, like Jeff the Killer's. And it held this madness to it that always shook me to the core. I would like to say that she always stood at the corner of my eyes, never in my line of sight. However, that was not the last time I saw her. When I closed my eyes that day, the next memory I have is when I was older, around 5 going into 6. I woke up at night and had this desire to get out of my home and into the gardens. I did. But before I did, I looked at my mom. She was still sleeping. However, the thing was, I wasn't me, I was moving, but I wasn't. Does that make sense? I remember the fear that I felt the moment I looked at my mom. I didn't fear her, no, but the fear of looking back. I stood straight facing the door, my mom to my right, and the closet to my back. I quickly realized it was me this time, faced the door, then it wasn't me. I could only watch as I walked out of the room, not even closing the door, that I am sure my mom locked closed as she never leaves any door open as she believes it invites beings into our homes. It was 2 minutes later that I reached the garden. I stood. That's all I did. Stand there in my pajamas with no shoes on the grass, staring at nothing but flowers and vegetables. But she was there again. Standing, waving, smiling, and getting closer by the minute. Did I mention it was late at night too? The full moon out, the stars shining, and freaking quite for some reason. That was the day she first touched me. Her left hand raised to my cheek, and she created it. I didn't feel fear but warmth, and her smile was no longer wide, but soft like the ones my mother would give me before she left for work, filled with endless love and kindness. No teeth but her ruby lips. Then I closed my eyes. My next memory was when my mom had sat me down to speak to me about my dad. My mom told me that he cheated on her with another woman and had a child with him. I didn't react at all but stared at her as she hugged me and crumpled on my shoulder, whispering in my ears that everything would be alright and that we would have a better life without him. But that wasn't what I was paying attention to. The woman was back, but this time she stood in my line of vision, and she had the grin back as she waved. I was hugging my mom while she stood there before she bent down, maybe 5 inches above my mom's head. She raised her left hand again. And for a second I thought she was going to touch me again. But no. She did something worse. Maybe to you it was the wind blowing through the window, or maybe the soft humming of the fan. To me, it felt like a gentle edit, a whisper of, shh. I don't know if she didn't want me to tell my mom or if she wanted me to be quiet as she stares at me. The shushing continued for another 5 seconds, then she stood for 10 seconds. I wasn't really counting. I could only stare and watch the shadows grow as she moved backwards, and then, with a blink of my eyes, she was gone. She made me remember how she sounded, and I never can forget it, no matter how loud I play the music on my phone at night just to sleep. Make noise, don't be quiet, be loud. Please. After that, she is always here, never in line of vision but that one time. Always at the corner of my eyes, and if I try to even put her in the line of vision, she leaves. I found peace with that. Every time I see her, I look, because it means she leaves. At least that's what I tell myself. But I know she doesn't leave, she wants me to look because she wants me to pay attention to her. And I can't not look at or ignore her because I know she will do anything it takes to make me focus on her. I remember one time I ignored her. I lived in a small home, picture you as me standing in the middle. The kitchen was maybe 4 feet by 10 feet with a counter on the left. A hallway in the middle, we are facing that hallway, and the dining room with a fridge to our left and the table farther down. I was hungry, so I wanted to eat cereal. Grabbing the milk from the fridge, I was passing the hallway to the kitchen to get a bowl. But I saw her again walking the opposite way I was going in the living room. The hallway leads to the living room. I didn't turn to her and continued to walk to get my bowl. I didn't hesitate in my step. I was so proud of myself. I never did that. I was happy I did it and didn't give in to her wishes. My worst mistake. I walked back to the dining room. I didn't see her. I ate my cereal in peace. And when I finished, I put my spoon in the bowl and stood. As I got out of the chair, there was this sudden fear that rushed through me. I took a deep breath and continued on. As I was going to walk past the hallway, this thing appeared. It had nothing but darkness about it. I couldn't make out what it was, but it walked on 4 of its limbs and had an outline that I think is hair. It looked like the mane of a lion. I never turned so fast in my life. It was 5 feet away from me, its arms reaching out to touch me. Thankful, due to my turning, it left. It had no shadow, it was no human because it was a shadow. I stood for 5 minutes staring at the spot it once stood, frozen in fear. Then she appeared in the corner of my eyes, on the right side. Always the right side. I understood it to be a warning. Never ignore me again. And I never did. It was peaceful after that, I guess. I still see her, I see her now, in the reflection of my phone as I type this. I just wanted to get this off my chest. You can believe me or not, I don't mind really. It sounds fake, and I won't fault you for thinking I'm lying or even calling me out on it. I just wanted to tell someone, and she's not doing anything to stop me. I would like to know why she's here and why me. But maybe. Some things are meant to be unknown. And if that's the cause, then I don't want to know. And if you do figure it out, good on you, but don't tell me. I don't want it to come back to me. I have a family I love. Siblings younger than 11. I love them to the core, and my parents, grandparents, and many more. I don't want it to affect them. But if it doesn't harm them, then yes, I would like to know.